I'm on the clock in 7 slow drafts right now. We'll make those picks today. We were going to do some exposure looks, but I messed up some CSV downloads. We'll do some Q&As. We'll catch up on news and information from the last week since I have been gone. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. What's up, guys? We got Bindles in the chat an hour before we even started. Dan's going to be doing some slow drafts this morning, some GMs. Ashton is currently in 75 slow puppies. Let's make some picks immediately. I'm starting to run low on drafts. And because I went out of state, I talked to you guys about this last week. I went out of state, but to another state that doesn't have underdog legality. I wasn't able to enter anymore. I'm pretty busy the next couple weeks, and then I go on vacation with the family again. And so I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to get more slows entered. I need to. Probably will have to find a time sometime in the next 2 weeks, go on a vacation, another one. So this one was to visit some of my family. It's the next one is to visit some of my wife's family. 2 weeks from Saturday. So we are a couple weekends away from that. We usually kind of pack in. I mentioned this last week, but my kids go to school. Their last day was the 20th, a week ago. I know in a lot of other parts of the country, people were done with school. Kids were done with school quite a bit earlier. But because my work gets so busy in August and the kids' school up here goes till the end of June, we kind of pack in these vacations like right when their school ends, late June, early July, because I got to be doing a lot of stuff in August for, normal stuff, normal leagues, redraft leagues, the newsletter, rankings, all that kind of good stuff. Those of you who have subscribed to the newsletter before know I write it like basically a piece every single day in August. So anyway, not sure when I'll be getting into more slows. I had done 40 the last time I was out of state. I was in Arizona at the beginning of June. About 20 of those are done. So my active drafts list is really starting to wane, and I would have loved to added to this, but not something I was able to do. We're going to finish up a bunch more here this morning. I can see that a couple of these are in the 18th round. We're going to take the final picks on those. Historical Anomaly says, "How was Big Sky Country?" Yeah, I mean, it was a blast. We went to Polson, which is near Kalispell, for anyone who knows Kalispell, north of Missoula, south of Glacier National Park, which a lot of people know from Montana. We can do let's do a little map chasing. I've done this on ship chasing before. I love to go, show people maps, but Polson is on the south side of Flathead Lake, which is the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. This lake's awesome. We rented a boat one day and went out on the lake. Glacier National Park, very famous, is up here in these mountains north of the lake. Kalispell is a little bit of a bigger, more well-known city north of the lake. My grandma lives in the southern part of Flathead Lake in Polson. Love Montana. It was a fantastic trip. Got a chance to go on the lake. Like I said, I did some inner tubing. When I was a kid, we used to inner tube a lot, and I could do barrel rolls, and so I busted out a few barrel rolls. My 36-year-old body, now 37. Yesterday was my birthday. I was super sore the next day. Played a couple rounds of golf with my brother. My golf game has been better than it's ever been in my life. I broke 80 for the first time. And then yesterday I played again and I shot a 76 back here in Seattle with a buddy. And made my first ever eagle. So golf has been great. It's been a fun week. But yeah, glad to be back in the slow draft streets. Appreciate you guys asking. GM, Johnny Footballs. Let's jump into a draft. I got a couple of these that are an hour remaining. I left them. I haven't made any picks this morning because I only have like 20 active drafts. I wanted to make sure I had as many on the clock as I could. This is an eliminator that's in the 18th round. The queue, I just threw a bunch of receivers in. Typically, that's me telling myself that structurally, I'd love to take a 7th receiver here. This is a team that through 17 rounds, is a 3-6-6-2 build. See, our buddy Eric Beimfor is here. He asked me today if I wanted to hop on his channel and talk about the eliminator with him next week. We'll probably be doing that. You'll also see me on Neil Orfield's channel later today at 4 Eastern, I believe it is, for anyone who wants to check that out. I was also on ADP chasing this week. Bunch of guest spots for me. Next week, really excited to hop on the Athletic Football Show as well with Robert Mays. So that'll be a blast next Tuesday. A lot of stuff. That one will probably be pre-recorded and released later in the week. But a lot of stuff coming up in addition to what's on the channel here. Yeah, appreciate that. Congrats on the Eagle. 489-yard par 5. I can hit my drives pretty long. I had somebody ask what that. There's a little golf thing right there. That was a trophy I won for a long drive at a scramble tournament. I had somebody ask what that was on the shelf. So I can kind of hit long, but I've never really had the finesse element. But it was a long par 5. I was 208 out, so I hit it about 280 off the tee. Although I wasn't like perfectly in the middle of the fairway, so probably closer to 290, right? And then I was 208 out, hit a 5 wood. There's water in front of the green. I was thinking about laying up, and I was like, you know what? We don't come out here to lay up. Hit a 5 wood and stuck it to like 12 feet. It was pretty awesome. I don't get a lot of good eagle looks, even though I have length, because I don't usually stick balls that close. And it was definitely one of the best eagle looks I've had. Was able to roll in the putt. Was pretty cool. Yeah, Ben, Scotty, Scheffler, Gretch. I mean, I still had a triple bogey and I shot a 76. That's the funny part. I had 3 birdies on the day and then that eagle. And it's the first time I've ever had 4 birdies or better. Sorry that I'm turning this into my golf game, but Dan's asking what's my drive carrying. It's funny because in Seattle everything carries less. There's the marine layer. Out in Montana, I was hitting some over 300. There's some like that course in Polson. There's some like 320-yard, par 4s, 308-yard par 4s, and I hit a couple like up near the green. So I can and then I played with my brother down in Arizona earlier this month, and he's a much better golfer than me, but I can hit it farther than him, basically. So that's always fun. But I can carry 300 in different climates. It's harder to do in Seattle, but I probably hit a couple 300 drives yesterday. Anyway, let's get back to this eliminator. Right now I have a 3-6-6-2 build. I'm going to stick to 2 tight ends typically in these. Trey McBride and David Njoku is strong enough for me to do that. The 3 QBs are Stroud, Goff, and Daniel Jones. So Daniel Jones is a fun one for the eliminator. I talked through some eliminator strategy, talked through how a huge percentage of the field is eliminated just in the first, half of the year. The issue with Daniel Jones at his ADP is, this guy might get benched late, but he's got some real ceiling when playing, and he should play for most of the year. I think the Giants really most of the coaching staff there could get fired if they have another really bad year this year. This is year 3 for Dable. He had a good year 1, a really disastrous year 2. They want to turn that around. These guys want to make things work with Daniel Jones this year in a major way. So they might just push him further than people are expecting in terms of, that injury guarantee on his contract and those things. That led to Russell Wilson getting benched last year, but that was Sean Payton's first year and he didn't want Russell Wilson anyway. little bit of a different situation with where the coaching staff and the organization is. They might be more willing to risk the injury guarantees because the people making the decisions, jobs are more on the line right now for 2024. But that is my thoughts on Daniel Jones, and especially for the Eliminator. Like, yeah, I'd want to have him in week 17, but the fact that he can provide some real weekly upside throughout the year is going to be huge for the Eliminator element as well. Definitely something that I'm definitely willing to grab Jones in this format. The marathon format's another one with Jones where, like, yeah, maybe he only gets benched for like week 17, week 18, but that doesn't matter in the marathon. It could matter in other formats. I understand that risk in other formats, but he's a great pick at cost in a couple of these formats where you do need to put a little bit more weight on the earlier weeks in addition to the late weeks. I'm sorry, I'm going to fire off a tweet here that we are live and hanging. Like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications, what have you. Anyway, CJ Stroud, Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, fun Eliminator quarterback room. I really like that. DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams, Kamani Vidal, Jalen Wright, Bucky Irving, and then I took Tyrone Tracy last round as my 6th running back. This is why I was like, I got to go receiver in the next round. Part of why I took Tracy is I thought he was the best fit to stack with Daniel Jones and for my needs on the roster. Probably the Giants receivers had already gone. Greg Dortch goes here. He's a guy that we'll talk about today because I haven't taken him at the end of a lot of drafts. Jalen Hyatt went right after I took. So I took Daniel Jones actually in round 17. Excuse me. Hyatt went. I took Tracy in 16, and then Slayton went before my Daniel Jones pick. So I didn't have any other stack options with Jones. I think I was actually debating Jones and Bo Nix, who goes just a couple picks behind Jones, because I do have Javonte Williams in this as well. I had both my quarterbacks could have been stacked with the running backs, but CJ Stroud has the week 14 bye. Didn't really feel like I needed to stack up the Nix and Stroud stuff, and then everything I just talked about with Daniel Jones being, I think, helpful to your point scoring on a weekly basis in the first half of the year, because I think he has, with the mobility, some real ceiling that most of the quarterbacks at like pick 200 don't have. You guys know I love Bo Nix. I've taken a lot of him. But Daniel Jones in this build, particularly with another quarterback already on a week 14 bye, I think really fit well. I don't have an ability to stack him now, though, with those other receivers that have gone off. I do have the Tracy stack, and Tracy's going to be a pass catching back. He played receiver first before changing positions. If he hits, he could be an intriguing, stack element. Although, for an Eliminator, how stacks work is, I think it's actually probably more important in the Eliminator because you kind of want weekly upside every week, right? You kind of want the spike week potential of a stack on your roster every week. I do have Amon-Ra St. Brown on this team, so I have him stacked with Goff. Debo Samuel, Stephon Diggs was my 3rd receiver, have him stacked with Stroud. Xavier Worthy, JSN, Dontavian Wicks. It's a good top 6 receivers, but it's also not deep, and this pick definitely has to be another receiver. I would like to be stronger at receiver than this in the Eliminator format. The offsetting element is hopefully I'm stronger at running back than some of my other builds, because I went DeAndre Swift. So I took Swift a couple picks behind ADP at pick 91. Kind of curious. Yeah, see, Lockett went 88 in this draft. Cortland Sutton went 86. Jamison Williams went 81. I took JSN at 78. Bimeford took Rashee Rice at 79. I'm taking JSN over Rashee Rice in the Eliminators for obvious reasons. You got the suspension risk with Rice, and I have so much Rice in other formats. The Eliminator is one where I'm, a little bit less likely to take the suspension risk on. But this was a draft where that wide receiver window kind of closed before I even got on the clock in my 8th round pick. I had taken 5 receivers, Trey McBride and CJ Stroud, through 7. But yeah, I had to start hitting some running back potential in rounds 8 and 9. I couldn't just chase the receiver stuff. That's why you take the 5 early receivers. But it meant that since round 8, I've only taken one other receiver. I took Dontavian Wicks in there. I've otherwise just been taking all my running backs, my second tight end, and then my second and third quarterbacks. So anyway, this definitely needs to be a wide receiver 7. The stack elements are interesting in the Eliminator. I just wrote another Eliminator piece the day I took off for my vacation. And one of the big stack considerations is not just week 17, but the stacks throughout the season. And you can get divisional elements. So like CJ Stroud. So each week 18 game is a divisional game. So each team has one of 3 other teams in their division that they only play once in the fantasy season because they also play them in week 18. So for Houston, I'm going to go check out their division, their schedule right now. They get the Titans in week 18. So the bring back for Houston, the preferred bring backs would be Colts or Jaguars because you would get 2 games. And in the Eliminator, you need upside each week. So you're building in game stacks twice in the season. The Texans play the Jaguars in weeks 4 and 13. They play the Colts in weeks 8 and why am I not seeing the other time they play the Colts? This is weird. On Pro Football Reference, it's not showing week 1. The Texans must play the Colts in week 1. I happen to be looking at Texans schedule. I'm going to look it up somewhere else. I happen to be looking at it. They play the Colts in week 1. I happen, for whatever reason, the table on Pro Football Reference right now, if you go to the 2024 season page for the Texans, is not showing week 1 on their schedule page. So the Colts were only listed once. I had to find the week that was missing to figure that out. So anyway, the Texans play the Colts week 1. Week 1, I'm not super concerned about for the Eliminator. It is going to be the easiest one to advance. If your team's good, if you got guys that are going to be able to score and your team's going to actually compete, ideally it should be able to get through those first weeks. So Jacksonville would really be the intriguing one where you have, week 4 and then you have another week, whatever week I just said, 13 or something, because now the other schedule that I'm looking at doesn't have weeks listed. Yeah, week 4 and 13 for Jacksonville. That's just an example, and I don't have a good Jacksonville out at receiver late. So, this is just something that is nice to build into your teams if you can. The out here would be Tank Bigsby, but I can't take another running back at this stage. So for Detroit, let's kind of do the same thing. The Detroit Lions have the Vikings in week 18, so you don't get a second bring back for them. So I didn't get any Colts or Jaguars onto this roster as bring back, like double bring backs for multiple weeks in the Eliminator season with Stroud. For Detroit, it would be Packers or Bears. I do have Swift that brings me that. So weeks 13 and 16, the later part of the year where things get pretty tricky, I have a Goff, Amon-Ra with a DeAndre Swift bring back. If Swift's right, that's, it's exciting to have. You still want to have week 17 stuff built into. I have JSN with Swift built into this as well. But having a Bear bring back on my Detroit stuff is pretty intriguing. And then I also have Dontavian Wicks. So I also have the Packer bring back. So weeks 9 and 14, I wrote about this in my recent Eliminator piece, but now my Goff, Amon-Ra stack has a bring back in weeks 9, 13, 14, and 16, which is pretty great. In addition to other they also play Trey McBride in week 3, right? So they play the Cardinals once. There's also a week 3 bring back. They play the Seahawks in week 4. There's also a week 4 bring back because I have JSN here. Some of that stuff's just going to happen naturally. But when you target the divisional teams, you work in 2 different game stacks, right? So my Goff Amon-Ra build here has a lot of different options for game stacks throughout the whole season. And you would like to see them, the Lions, be a team that gets into a lot of shootouts and on a weekly basis provides me spike week potential from different parts of my roster, particularly during those bye weeks where I have some guys on bye. If the Goff, Amon-Ra, and DeAndre Swift bring back really hits in Okay, that's not a good example because the 2 times it plays the Bears, the Lions play the Bears, there are no buys. But with the Dontavian Wicks bring back really hits in week 14, that's great because I have Javonte Williams on a bye in 14. I have CJ Stroud on a bye in 14, as well as Stephon Diggs, who is stacked with Stroud. I have some key players on bye in 14, but I also have this little game stack, my secondary stack of Goff, Amon-Ra, and Wicks that can, give my team some ceiling without being at full strength on my roster. One of those types of things that's interesting to think through in the Eliminator. I don't probably need to build anything else to the Detroit stuff. I'm just trying to look at, these outs. So now I also have the Giants. I have Daniel Jones. The Giants play in week 18. The Eliminator stuff, I really do think makes a lot of sense to be doing slows because you can really think through this stuff. The Giants play the Eagles in week 18. So it's the Cowboys and the Commanders that they get twice. They get the Commanders in week 2 and then again in week 9. They get the Cowboys in 4 and 13. Did Jalen Tolbert already go in this? He did, but I could go to Ryan Flournoy, who we talked about in the Dallas episode. I mean, what if he's the dude, that eats up some of that available volume? I would get a bring back on my Daniel Jones, Tyrone Tracy, QB running back stack. Weeks 4 and 13, I'd have some outs there. It's kind of interesting. I have DJ Chark at the top of the queue. I believe the Chargers, I was looking at them already, play Kansas City in week 18. I have Xavier Worthy on this team. So you can still do mini stacks in multiple games, right? But the Chargers, no, they get the Raiders in week 18. So part of why I put Chark here is they do get the Chiefs in weeks 4 and 14. I could get a little bit of a Chief Chargers bring back, but do I have Vidal on this team? I do have Vidal on this team already. So I already have that Chiefs Chargers game with a little bit of a bring back built in. I could still take another Charger and say that Vidal and Chark are also, full season correlated, and saying that the Chargers offense is, somewhat fun for fantasy. So Chark's a fine pick. The Flournoy question is like, do I want to get an extra bring back on my Daniel Jones stuff, which isn't even that sexy? It's a Daniel Jones, Tyrone Tracy thing. Like the Goff Amon-Ra, because Goff is a drop back passer as well. Like, I love that I have that stuff. I have the bringbacks on that. I hate that I don't on Stroud. Stroud would make sense as well. When those guys hit in a big way, those types of drop back passers, the whole game environment elevates. Daniel Jones more of a, because of the mobility element when he hits the ceiling, doesn't necessarily have to provide the game environment with a huge upside, thing. So Flournoy, probably going to talk myself out of. I have Khalif Raymond start as well. He would be another piece to the Detroit stack. That's kind of interesting because I talked through all the bringbacks that I have to have multiple paths on Detroit and really make this a Detroit game stack throughout the season type of build. Rondale Moore is just a late round pick that I like, but I don't see any specific reason to take him. Chark, again, fits in with the Vidal stuff. He fits in with also have Javonte Williams. So the Chargers, I'd have little minis with the Chargers, with the Broncos and the Chiefs because they play the Raiders in week 18. And they also play the Raiders in week 1, which is sort of nice because week 1, again, doesn't matter a ton. They get the Chiefs in 4 and 14. They get the Broncos in 6 and 16. So 4, 6, 14, and 16, I would have 2 Chargers players going up against Javonte Williams or Xavier Worthy, as a bring back. And I would have these little mini game stacks built into this Eliminator that would give me some weekly upside each week. It's a little bit like weekly winners in that way, where you want to think through how you can. But in weekly winners, I know a lot of people are targeting specific weeks. I think in this, you really want to be trying to layer upside across the schedule. try to hit as many weeks as you can, basically. Chark's a guy I really like for other sort of unrelated reasons, man, but I haven't taken a lot of Raymond, and I think I've seen some decent arguments for him. I think you probably expect Jamison Williams to take a step forward, which complicates things. But even in that case, Raymond's probably playing in 3 receiver sets. Like, I don't think it's Donovan Peoples-Jones, Laporta, Amon-Ra, Jamison Williams, and then Raymond is playing. And they've always liked him, and he was actually a really efficient player last year. I think with the way that I have them stacked up, I have Debo as well on this team. So I have a week 17 stack with them too. I have the DeAndre Swift bring back in 16, and then the Debo week 17. I think you just really want this to be a big-time Detroit bet. I only have 1 week 5 running back, no week 5 buys at tight end, and no other wide receivers other than Amon-Ra. And then obviously I also have Jared Goff. So taking on another week 5 buy is double stacking Detroit adds another week 5 buy, but I only have one other week 5 buy on the whole roster. That's not a Detroit Lion. That's Kamani Vidal. So I went up with 4 week 5 buys. It's the earliest buy. It's the one that I is probably most manageable with my, hopefully my Stroud Diggs stack does really well in week 5, or Daniel Jones has a spike week in week 5. I got a lot of other players that should be active and healthy in week 5. The pick here is Khalif Raymond. And that's going to finish up that Eliminator build. It's a fun one. A lot of questions in the chat. Got Tim saying, morning, what are your thoughts on Calvin Ridley this year? A lot of mainstream analysts love him, and I don't get it. Worst situation, worst QB, paired with elite target earner in D-Hop. We talked about this on ADP chasing. Pat Corain did a great job of breaking it down. I was asking some questions about Hopkins. We agreed that Hopkins should go ahead of Ridley. He got me to essentially say that, I should take a little bit more Hopkins. But I'm also very much concerned about the QB element. We've talked about Will Levis a little bit on these streams. I don't think Ridley is draftable really anywhere close to his current ADP. You have to be like, could he be the guy you need? Sure. Like everybody can be, but you have to be willing to take some stands and to make some make some calls and have some opinions. And I think you put it well. Worst situation, worst QB, got more target competition, probably not great. This says, are you going to be talking Eliminator with Neil? I am not sure if I will be talking Eliminator with Neil. He just invited me on. We haven't talked I think we're doing BBM, but we'll see about that. A GM from 40. What do you think about Detroit being the team you need in the Eliminator? A whole lot of dome games. Yeah, I mean, so this is another thing about the Detroit thing is like you can definitely see that team being one where having all of those game stacks built into your schedule is great because they could just be the highest scoring team in the league because they're also a team that's giving up plenty of points as well. Like that was them last year, right? Like they were a team that they were 5th in points for. They were 23rd in points against. I'm not sure if that's I believe that is because that's on their team page. I believe that's ranking it in a negative way. Like they gave up a lot of points, but let me check. Yeah, they gave up the 10th most points and were a playoff team because they scored the, whatever I said, 5th most points. Their games had a lot of points. And they play in domes. They play a style of offense. Jared Goff is never going to scramble. They don't really pound the ball. They play a style of offense that includes a lot of passes, can stop the clock, certainly leads to more play volume, high pass rate. Ultimately, even just like without like dogging their defense, the way that they play is going to lead to more scoring and more play volume in games. So yeah, I mean, I love it. I love this point. We got through obviously me talking about it while making those picks. What do you think of Perrine to the Bengals? Rumor, I'm holding off on Chase Brown for now. I wouldn't be holding off on Chase Brown purely because of this. They keep talking about him as the number 2. They seem very excited about him. The idea that it's not really a rumor. The idea that if Perrine gets cut, he might land back with his old team is one that I've heard floated. I haven't heard it as like a specific rumor because I don't know that everyone's like in agreement that Perrine's going to get cut. That seems to be a pretty clear. This is one of those things that I think the fantasy community like connects dots, and it certainly could happen. But I'm not like personally, I'm not holding off on Chase Brown for now because of that. Chase Brown's price is bad. Like it's very exploitable. It's low. It's too low. If he gets buried by Perrine for the long down and distance stuff, he will still have value as a handcuff behind Moss because Perrine's not going to be the every down, early down back, even if Moss gets hurt. Chase Brown was a workhorse in Illinois. I talked about this recently, showed his game log and his big, his high volume games. I'm in on Chase Brown. The rumor is not great to have out there other than the fact that I think it's holding Brown's price down. He used to be right next to Tyjae Spears, and a gap has widened there. And I liked Brown over Spears, so it's nice now to have that gap that's like 2 rounds. Spears has been the one that people are really chasing up, and they're letting Brown slide. I think Brown should be up where Spears is. So, I mean, if you wanted to be worried about the Perrine rumor, if Brown was priced like Tyjae Spears, then I would be worried about it, or I'd be willing to talk about it. But this is a great example of the type of thing where like it's all cost related, and this is probably being fed into his price more than it should. And that's just an opportunity. I've warmed to JSN. I think he gets camp hype again this year. I also think the OC last year was a pinhead. I'm with you, Ball's life. I do think we're going to get the camp hype for sure. How is all the spike week potential beneficial when you're just trying not to finish last? It seems high risk, high reward. This is a good question about the Eliminator format. You're not just trying to finish last, first of all. Even in the weeks where you have a higher advance rate out of your pod, it's like 80%. It's like 5 out of every 6 advance. It's like 83% is, I think, the highest. And that's week 1. You have 10 out of 12 that advance. You're trying not to finish in the bottom 2 in that format or in that situation out of 12. There's others for the bulk of the mid part of the season. Let's just pull up that table that I pulled up last week because it'll just be easier to look at the specific numbers. This is the little table that I made and have shared in my write-ups. But so week 1, you have the 83.3% advancing that week. Then it's 80% for a stretch, 8 out of 10. There's 2 teams that don't make it. By week 4, there's 3 teams in your pot of 10 that don't make it. It's only 70%. It does bounce back to 75% for a couple of weeks. But like by week 7, 5 of 8 make it. 3 out of 8 don't make it. That's a pretty that's not just trying to not finish last. You got to finish at least mid-pack in a pod that going into week 7, only 21% of the field still is around. 80% of the field has already been eliminated by week 7. So just by like what you wrote here, I believe is a fair point in the first couple weeks. But what I'm trying to articulate is that I think a lot quicker than people realize, these pods get incredibly difficult. Just by week 4, half the field has already been eliminated, which means you're facing the better half of the field, right? There's going to be some variance there, but you're facing good teams in your pod, and you got to finish top 7 out of 10. 3 teams are going to get eliminated out of the week 4 pods. You're not even to the buys yet. You got to have the ability to score points. And one of the things I wrote about in my 2 eliminator pieces now, which are both free at bengretch.substack.com. If you guys want to go read them, I've taken the paywall down on both of them because we talk about it a lot on the streams. I had some people asking the YouTube comments about it. I want to let everyone know that that is a premium newsletter, but because we're having so much fun talking about the eliminator stuff, I wanted to make that whole analysis. There's a lot there. Free for anybody who is interested in reading through it all, getting kind of a sample of the type of analysis that I do with the newsletter. What I talked through in both of them a lot is that this idea of just trying not to finish last is a misconception about the eliminator, that you do need to take a higher risk strategy, that you do need upside, that the way to have floor in fantasy scoring is to have a lot of ceiling in your team, so that even, some weeks when you have guys on bye and some other guys, like you're going to have a week in the Eliminator where you have multiple running backs on a bye, and then another one had a concussion that week, and you only have 2 active running backs, and one of them gets 2.4 points, and that hits your lineup. And you're like, man, that's like a disaster. How do you survive that? You have spike week potential at wide receiver. You have spike week potential at tight end with an elite tight end. You have the stack element, the game stack with the QB, receiver, and a bring back, and you actually have some of that hit that week. So that provides you a floor where it's a top-heavy format. There's no balanced scoring in your roster. There are some high-end spike weeks and some low totals, and that adds up to a middle-of-the-pack score. I think people think you got to get 10 points from each lineup spot, and that's going to give you this nice, comfortable middle-of-the-pack score. You can't do that every week. If you're trying to do that, you're going to have some weeks where those 10s become 2s because of buys, because of injuries, and then you don't have enough 20s. You need the spike weeks to offset the downs. You need to be trying to win your pod every week, is the argument that I made. You need to be building a team that is so dominant that, and I've built these teams in seasonal leagues where we have like for people who have all play, right? Where you have the all play and you look back, you're like, man, this team was winning 10-1 every week against all of its opponents. That's a team that's going to win the Eliminator. The team that is dominant enough to win its pod every week, to be 10-1. It's all play record at the end. It's not going to be a team that survives middle of the pack through each week and somehow is like never winning its pod, but is floating in the middle and never getting eliminated. That is not the team that's going to win this Eliminator. I can almost guarantee that. Or at least, obviously there's percentages to stuff, but 9 times out of 10, the team that actually survives this gauntlet and wins the Eliminator is a team that, if you were in a league with all play, dominates your fantasy league and went 11-1 or 11-0 against the other 11 teams a bunch of the weeks, and then went 9-2 other weeks. And like its worst week was, a week when it went 6-5, but it never had a week where it went 2-9. It was just so dominant at the top. For those of you who don't know all play, it means you play every team every week. You get a win-loss record against all the other 11 teams in your league. That's just one way for me to try to articulate the point I'm trying to make about the different pods, because these pods get tougher and tougher too. It's not the same as all play in a normal fantasy league. In all play in a normal fantasy league, you have good players and the other players in your league don't. And so you can beat the same bad 11 teams every week all year long. In this, you have good players and the pods get tougher and tougher because the field whittles down, and eventually you're facing pods that have all the same good players as you. And so you do need the correlation and the boost element in week 9 when there's only 9.2% of the field left in week 9, in week 10 when there's only 6.6% of the field left, and your star hit play for the season. You were right about Chase Brown. We were just talking about Chase Brown is the absolute stud mid-round running back. You have him. So does most every other team in the 6.6% of remaining teams. There's 5 teams in your pod. 4 of them have Chase Brown. Chase Brown goes for 20. It doesn't help you. I mean, it maybe eliminates that 5th team, but it still puts you in a situation where you got to have other ceiling on your roster to beat these other good teams. And so even that all play thing that I'm talking about is a more conservative way of thinking about it than the way that you're going to have to get through this gauntlet in the Eliminator. The pods get tougher. The available teams left whittled down quickly. That's why I say with confidence that the team that wins this is a team that is just a really good team that wins the pods early in the year, that is putting up ceiling week after ceiling week because it has a bunch of hits. I think you have to build an even higher upside team in this than you do in like Best Ball Mania, where you can have down weeks and still finish top 2 out of 12 in your pod and then advance. In this, you basically have to get through pod after pod after pod after pod. You don't have to win them, but you do need ceiling. You do need the ability to score, not for weeks 1, 2, and 3, but starting right away in week 4, right? Especially in week 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, like all of those weeks, this gets tough. You're going into all these weeks with a really limited number of the field remaining and not very many people advancing out of these pods. It's closer to 60%, 55% of tough pods, of pods that are made up of top 98th and 99th percentile teams. Like, what you're going to get through week 12 when 5 of 9 in your pod advance and only 2.3% of the field even made it to week 12. So it's the very best teams in that 9-man pod. You're going to get through week 12 just trying not to finish last. Like, that's not the way that that's going to go. You're behind the 8 ball in the Eliminator. This whole idea of, being able to play it safe is just not the way the Eliminator works. Brian, love this note. Jalen Brooks, obligatory callback. We had a lot of fun with Jalen Brooks. And also, like the video. Brian says, it would be cool, a PDF with each format, BBM, Eliminator, Marathon, etc., and just bullet points of main strategy elements. I think this would be great as well. One of the arguments that I've made is that a couple of the formats don't have major changes in strategy. So BBM, I think, is the one that, like, there are obviously strategies that are very specific to BBM, and people are very, I think, aware of those as well. And then you can kind of use that as the tent pole. Like, how is this different from BBM? And some of them I don't think are that different, ultimately. Like, I don't think the sprint is that different from BBM. In fact, I think it's very similar. You just weigh in week 15 and 16 more. But week 15 and 16 are already probably being underutilized by the field in BBM. But yeah, ultimately, weeks 15, 16, and there's less of a, the advance rate stuff is, I guess, probably a little bit more important in sprint as well, because you're just trying, like, every team that gets through. And Sacrilegious has done a great job writing about every team that gets through is in the final round in sprint. You don't have to advance multiple pods. And Sacrilegious has done a great job over at Legendary Upside writing about if you're doing a ton of sprint teams, that you should try to balance your exposures and your builds, because every team that advances is in the final round, and you don't want to be like competing with your own similar teams and stealing EV from yourself. Basically, you should be trying to get through different types of builds. And I think that's a great point. There's some minor differences, but I don't think the sprint is markedly different from BBM in the way that, like, Eliminator can be really, really different. And we're obviously talking through a lot of it. Certainly best ball is going to be very, very different. The approach is going to be very different. Let's go look at this best ball team. Best ball. I'm trying to say Superflex when I say best ball there. I'll get back to the comments in a moment. Let's go look at this Superflex team where I put a thumbs down emoji. I don't know when I did that or why. We are in the 15th round for this team. One of the things that I made a little note that, like, I wanted to talk through at some point is this little comment I had that was like, this would be great to have on the stream. Sometimes when I have a little thought about some like a passage that I want to include in a newsletter, I'll put it in a notes app and I'll make sure to include it. It's like a written thing for my later write-up. This is a written thing I did the same thing for this YouTube channel, but I wrote, the worst thing about slow draft life is sometimes you got to just draft a guy to see how it feels. And sometimes it surprises you and you kind of like the guy in that build, but most of the time, right away, you didn't regret not having exposure to that guy. And when it's slow drafts, you have to sit and look at that terrible 3rd round pick for 2 weeks. That's not even the best sentence. I would have, one of those things where I would have edited that when I actually put it into the newsletter. But the sentiment is very real. I have these teams where I put the thumb down. This team's only in round 15. I got like 6 more picks to make with this team through round 20. And I'm afraid to even look at it. It's a Patrick Mahomes build. I took Derek Carr and Daniel Jones in that window where I usually wasn't taking QBs, pick 69 and pick 76. Typically, it's either an anchor QB or multiple anchor QBs and then not going back to the QB position, or it's one, it's either multiple anchor QBs or one anchor QB and then not going back until like later than this, at least. What that does, this is the window really where, like, I called it like the QB dead zone a few weeks ago, where you have a tougher sell that, like, let's look at the players like took Derek Carr over. Like, Mark Andrews went 1 pick after Derek Carr. Like, yeah, Derek Carr matters in Superflex, but man, Mark Andrews is an elite tight end. I don't want to be taking Mark Andrews. I don't want to be taking Derek Carr over Mark Andrews. Kyle Pitts goes in between my 2 picks. Daniel Jones then goes. You still have T. Higgins on the board when I take both Derek Carr and Daniel Jones. George Pickens, Christian Kirk, Amari Cooper all went in that round. I would have loved to be taking T. Higgins and Mark Andrews in this range and not Derek Carr and Daniel Jones. That's where the gap is the widest, and you're taking QB for need, and then you hate your team. So Patrick Mahomes, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones. My running backs are Aaron Jones and James Conner. I took some old backs here. Javonte Williams, Kamani Vidal. That running back room is actually fine, which probably means that the receivers suck. Garrett Wilson, Drake London, great start. Deebo Samuel, Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jerry Jeudy, not that bad. Travis Kelce, stacked with Patrick Mahomes. Okay, in terms of me putting a thumbs down emoji next to a team, this team doesn't suck as bad as I would have thought it did. In the queue here, I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Michael Mayer. Mayer, I guess, is a bring back on the Derek Carr thing. Oh, here's part of the issue. I don't have Derek Carr stacked, and I don't have any other path to stack him, really. I don't have Daniel Jones stacked. So I took those two guys without really considering options. So I started this draft, Patrick Mahomes, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Travis Kelce. And so now I have the Mahomes Kelce. I have Garrett Wilson and Drake London. I take Deebo in the next round. I really like that through 5 rounds. But then I go Carr and Daniel Jones, and I think I wasn't really thinking that, for Daniel Jones, you want to have a Malik Neighbors build typically. There's some outs late. Derek Carr, you want to have a Chris Olave build typically, which I didn't have here. I don't really love Rashid Shaheed's price. Where did he go? Could I have gotten him? Oh, there's extra columns on the right. I've done this before on stream. Rashid Shaheed goes at 133, right at the turn. I had taken Javonte Williams in the early 11th. He goes at the 11-12 turn. I take A.D. Mitchell all the way back in the 12th. I didn't take a receiver in any of the rounds immediately prior to Shaheed's pick. It's just a tough receiver pocket for me. But I could have potentially done that. Did Wan'Dale already go? I mean, I think the big pick that I need to be targeting here with the Daniel Jones play is Wan'Dale Robinson, who I would be taking 13 picks ahead of ADP here as my wide receiver 7. 185. My next pick isn't until 189. I think I just bite the bullet and build in a Wan'Dale Robinson stack element here. I do have the bring back with A.D. Mitchell for week 17 if this team gets that far. The tight end, other than Kelce, my other tight ends can just be late round guys. I have Michael Mayer highlighted, like I said, as a bring back, but I don't even have a Saint. I could take like an A.T. Perry. I could take Jawan Johnson really late, even though, he's banged up, so he's sliding. And then I would at least have like a later season. He could be my tight end 2. Mayer could be my tight end 3. I have CEH also noted here as a potential build out on my Kansas City thing. I think the pick right now is to just grab. The other pick would be like Bucky Irving because I only have 4 running backs. But Aaron Jones, James Conner, Javonte, it gets me through the early part of the year, if nothing else. Kamani Vidal's a nice upside play already. Can be a little slower with my RB5. Could be Irving here. Maybe he falls to my next pick. Could be Tyrone Tracy at my next pick. It could be Braylon Allen. So I can go running back next pick if I go Wan'Dale here, and then I can hit tight end later. This is going to wind up being a build that I like, I think, as we talk through the final rounds. Let's do one more Superflex, and then I will be caught up on Superflex picks for now. This is actually in the 20th round. I have Greg Dortch highlighted. It is not a Kyler Murray team. So in with the Superflex drafts having 20 rounds, that's because more quarterbacks are drafted overall, but also it opens up for a lot more running backs and receivers to go. And it's made me have to dig deeper into the receiver and running back rooms. And the running back that I wind up taking on every team in these, because it goes so late, is Audric Estime. I just think the upside there is really great. We've talked about the Broncos situation a ton. I'm really liking getting him, especially if I didn't get Javonte earlier. And then the wide receiver, when I need a late receiver upside play, is Greg Dortch. Kyler Murray's talking about if he was 6'2", he'd be a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, or 6'4", or whatever it was, that nobody can guard him. His numbers aren't amazing, but he's had some big target games already in his career where and he had a decent production profile while at Wake Forest and was pretty good there. So Dortch is a dude that I'm getting into. Yeah, so he had a 10-9-80 game in 2022. Later that year, a 10-9-103 game. Later that year, an 11-10-98 game, and then another 10-target game where he only caught 4 passes, and a 9-target game where he caught 7 passes. This was all in 2022. There were some matchups where he had big targets, 5 games with 9 or more targets. Last year, not so much of that, but he did have a 9-target game, an 8-target game, and a 7-target game. A lot of lower target games, and if you look at his overall routes run profile, it's not like targets per route run isn't very strong any of these years. There's some games where he has like a lot of routes and no targets, or at least a decent number of routes and no targets. Or like a really low amount. I'm trying to figure out like which games they are when I'm looking at the game log, like why his targets per route run doesn't really pop. But I mean, he does have some solid usage when he's been put out there and needed to be relied upon. And a lot of that is coincided with when Rondale Moore's not been on the field, because they're both kind of similar players, small dudes. Who are going to play a lot of slot and get a lot of short area targets. Dortch, obviously Rondale's not there anymore. I think Dortch should be going ahead of Michael Wilson and Zay Jones, because I think those guys are kind of competing for playing time, and it's possible that they both spend some time in that role. I think Marvin Harrison's your other outside receiver. I think you have Trey McBride as the key tight end. The guy that I'm like confident should have a role as a third weapon in this passing game is Dortch, and I think there will be plenty of underneath volume for him as well. The vertical stuff can get taken away in some offenses. I mean, Michael Wilson didn't do much, so far in his career. Zay Jones is fine and could frankly beat him out a little bit. Dortch is the one where I'm like, yeah, I mean, the routes are going to be okay. Like, he's going to have usable weeks for a 20th round pick. Like, anyway, I was taking a lot of Rondale Moore in the big board and the pre-draft stuff. He was the guy I fell in love with in the 18th or the 20th round, and those were 20 rounds as well. In the 20th round pre-draft, I've had some moments of time with other guys, just really liking them late. Right now is like, this is one of those funny things about all of my slow drafts hitting the final rounds at the same time. But right now, the guy that I love is Dortch, and I'm just taking him, and I'm taking Estime a lot, and I'm willing to take him a lot because I'm telling myself that, there's a misprice here. Anyway, this team is Stroud, Jaden Daniels, Aiden O'Connell. O'Connell's the other guy I took a lot in these super flexes, where I do think he starts a decent amount of the year for the Raiders, finished the year really well under Antonio Pierce as an interim head coach, and then Pierce gets the full-time job. I think they want O'Connell to be their kind of developmental QB this year, and he jived with Devontae Adams last year. I mean, they worked well together. Adams had some big games late with O'Connell under center. So the hope is with Stroud and Daniels having the same bye, O'Connell can provide some QB3 support in this particular build. Kyron Williams, Devin Singletary, Ty Chandler, Braylon Allen, Roshan Johnson, Audric Estime. I already took Estime on this team. 6 running backs already built into this roster. Drake London, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison. Some big names at the top. A lot of early capital at wide receiver. Xavier Legette and Jahan Dotson was 15 picks behind ADP, and it gave me a Daniel stack. I ended up not getting Luke McCaffrey, so I was glad to have gotten Dotson. I took Legette with a lower ADP at the pick hot earlier because I think Dotson's a really tough pick at his cost, but I ended up getting him 15 picks after ADP. Kind of couldn't pass that when I didn't have a Daniel stack at that point. My Houston stack is Nico. My Aiden O'Connell stack is Brock Bowers. So at tight end, I have Mark Andrews, Brock Bowers, and then I took Jawan Johnson as well because he's a bring back on the Raiders stuff. Aiden O'Connell and Brock Bowers. I didn't need a third tight end, but Jawan Johnson was 8 picks behind and already falling ADP, and I guess I just was like, all right, fine, I will add this bring back element. If both those guys hit, then obviously I need, in this week 17 matchup, then I need, I'm having a tight end hit my flex, which this team also has Andrews, who I would want to be hitting in week 17. So I don't really know why Jawan Johnson fits this build. I actually think that's a pretty bad pick. I've been busy in the last week and like I mentioned, birthday yesterday, traveling before. A lot of my picks have been quick and not as detailed. this Juwan Johnson pick is a good example. I don't think I needed a third tight end here. I don't think the bring back makes a lot of sense when the primary stack includes a tight end, and I already have an elite tight end in this build. I would need both these guys to hit the lineup. And even, I mean, Aiden O'Connell is just like a reserve quarterback. Like, for him to hit my super flex means one of Stroud or Daniels is failing. Like my this little week 17 thing I just built in is like requiring some of my really good picks to be the reason I got there and then to fail. And that is a path, but it's not a path that I want to be like optimizing for. Anyway, I only have 7 receivers, a lot of room for an 8th receiver. He doesn't correlate with anything other than, well, he's got Xavier Legette in week 16. I don't have a Ram. I don't have another Cardinal. I don't have any reason to take. Oh, yeah, I have Kyron Williams. Okay, that's probably why I highlighted Dortch. So he has a week 16 and a week 17 mini correlation. He's a guy that I'm really liking to add when you get to pick 235, which in most of my drafts aren't going that late. All right, let's go back to the comments for a little bit. You got Mr. Popinski saying, I don't envy you slow drafters. Ben Havard saying, only way I could have 600 drafts down at this point is because of slow draft hell. That's right. I mean, I don't, when I was on vacation, I got a few of the fast drafts in. When I was down in Arizona, got a handful in. And I understand why people talk about multi-tabling, because it is tricky, man. Like, to find the time to commit to think through a draft. When I've only really done the live drafts, fast drafts on streams, and I'm obviously engaged in that stream at that time. But to be like out in the world, like, I don't know, I would need to be having, downtime, which I didn't really have on vacation. So I understand that, like, sometimes, you're just bored at home and it makes sense. But they take a long time, man. Like, my downtime at home, I'm usually I like to do crosswords. I do the New York Times crosswords when I'm, taking my morning BM. I could do a draft at that time, sure, but it's not a 50-minute event, right? Like, I can do my crossword for 10, 15 minutes, enjoy my peace and quiet, and then I go out about my day. If you do your draft during that time, you also have to set aside some time after that. I know a lot of people talk about doing it while they're working out, while they're doing laundry, a lot of those types of things. Makes perfect sense to me. But there's also, like, there's a cost of potentially being distracted. There's all of that type of stuff. Like, I don't know. You guys would have to tell me more about how you guys fit in so many fast drafts. But the thing I do like about all these slow drafts is I sit here and I pick them, and it's a lot, like, day in and day out. There's times when I'm traveling. I was in, like, when we drove to Montana, it was 8-hour drive. I had to make sure I got all my picks done right before we got in the car, and I'm loading up the car, like, trying to get the family together, but get all my picks done before we go, because they're going to time out on the road. And then also checking in on the road when I'm filling up my gas tank to make sure that there's nothing that's going to time out before I get to Montana. Same thing on the way back, on the drive back. We left early in the morning. I'm making my picks early. So, like, when you have these events that pop up where you're like, okay, I'm going to be not connected for the next 8 hours, I have to plan way ahead. So the slow draft stuff does suck, but as long as you do it for a few weeks and you're willing to battle through it, you wind up with a lot of teams done. And you kind of pick and choose when you have time to just make the picks for like 10 minutes. Sometimes I have to just make all the picks really fast because I don't have enough time. And I'm on the clock in a bunch of leagues. I'm going to time out. I have more stuff going on. Like, I went golfing yesterday. I got to make sure I make the picks early in the morning before I golf, because something will time out during the time I'm on the course, or I'm trying to make my picks during the round, which is, I like to focus on my golf game, but I did some of that too. I'm making some picks during the round, in between holes, if there's a little bit of a wait, whatever. It is, the slow draft hell does kind of suck, but I feel like you do have a lot more flexibility. And then at the end of it, you're like, man, I have a bunch of teams that are done. Like, I have I'm going to be done with 100 teams. Not going to be done with 600 like Ben. But I do really enjoy, that element of it, that it sucks. And then when you're done, you're like, man, I just finished a lot of teams when they all hit at the end. Like, my completed tab is now up to 46 in the regular thing. I have 11 eliminators. I have 13 super flexes. That's like 70 total. I was going to try to get all of these in one of the tools, but when I downloaded the CSVs, it's weird. The links like change. I think it changes to your last download. And so I got like the Underdog you go to email exposure ADP or CSV. What I have now is we can only process one CSV per day. I did all of them back to back to back, but then all of the links were only my most recent download. So I think the link ends up like, if you ever need to do this, you want to get all your exposures together. Like Fantasy Life has a tool where you could potentially upload. I've been trying to see if I can upload all the different formats together. I know Michael Dubner's tool works for that. And so I was going to use his tool for it. But you need to download one and then copy the CSV over and then download another and copy the CSV over. Because I just downloaded. And then all three of the links ended up being my most recent download, the same link. And I couldn't get a link to my earlier downloads because I guess Underdog sends you basically the same link and it updates. So even though it was an earlier email, that link was now changed to my more recent download. So when you download these individually, if you do download your stuff for exposure, if you want to combine all your different formats, which is what I was trying to do. Like I can go to Superflex and I can go to exposure, but there's only 13 teams. I was just telling you guys I've been taking a lot of Estime and Dortch, right? So I show 53% and 46% on those, but this is only 13 teams. If I go over to, NFL season, the 46 teams that I've built out, I don't think I have Estime at 6.5% in those. So where am I at with Estime overall is what I want to know, right? Dortch, I have at 2.2% in those 46 drafts. Where am I at with Dortch overall, right? Like that's the stuff that, am I getting too heavy on Dortch? Well, I don't really know. I know that I am in my Superflex builds, but I'm sort of comfortable with that. That's the format where I think he makes sense. I don't want to be overexposed to him overall, but I don't really, I see a lot of the tweets as well. Mentioned Eric Beinfor a little bit ago, saw a tweet from him earlier about how he's trying to, and using the Spike Week tools, trying to mix and match his builds so that they're not as like correlated. He was talking about he has just a handful of Amon-Ra St. Brown teams, and they all have a lot of Devontae Adams and a lot of Cooper Kupp, and he's trying to flatten that out. My read on that personally, and I think this is sort of a unique take, this is why I'm sharing it, is that I don't care about that. Like if I'm like, part of the premise for him on that was that he's not heavy on Amon-Ra St. Brown because he's been targeting other guys in that range. So if I'm not heavy on Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm okay being like, okay, I'm just going to let the chips fall where they may. I'm not going to make bad picks in the early rounds. I mean, if they're all within the same tier and it's easy enough to balance out, I understand it. But I don't mind having multiple builds that have the same top three players. And then also like, yeah, if Cooper Kupp gets hurt, it kind of bombs all my Amon-Ra teams. I get that that's like annoying because then if Amon-Ra becomes the guy that you need and I go back and I look and I'm like, I only had 3 or 4 Amon-Ra teams and they all had Cooper Kupp and they all got bombed because of, Cooper Kupp. Like I just take my medicine and deal with it. That's the same thing as bad pod luck. Like that's the same. Like I've also seen the comments about like not getting the different draft slots. And so I don't have enough exposure to player X because I haven't gotten this draft slot enough. I'm sort of just like, whatever, man. Like that I'm just not in on that player this year. Like it's all probabilistic. Like to me, it's a lot like the great Jacob Sanderson comment on ADP chasing a couple weeks ago about the 4% exposure blanket. It just makes you feel warm and comfy at night to have an Amon-Ra St. Brown build that doesn't have Cooper Kupp or Devontae Adams in it. And now you have like a little bit of a different type of build. That's going to give you your 4% exposure blanket. Like that one build has to have a hell of a lot of other stuff right to be right. It has to have the pod luck. It has to have everything. Just getting one flat exposure build to a player you're not even on that much anyway with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm not trying to like go at Eric. I would tell him this to his face as well. We're good buddies. But like, I think that is a little bit of a 4% exposure blanket kind of a mentality where like, I just want to feel warm and cozy about it, but it's not actually doing anything. That was the point of Jacob's comment, is like, if you're flattening out a guy that you don't even have that much exposure to anyway, you basically have 1 or 2 of each of a few different types of builds. And it's like, okay, like you might hit the nuts with that type of build, but I don't really mind having 3 or 4 Amon-Ra, Adams, Kupp, and or 10 even. and hoping that that 3 is right. And then I have 10 different variations of that. Like, I'm okay with that. I don't know. And maybe that's giving up, sacrificing EV and stuff, which I think has been discussed, but in some formats. But I think it's one of those things where we wind up as humans overweighting the things that we can control when there's a ton of variance in this anyway. Like, that's why I bring up the pod luck and stuff. There's a lot of things that we can't control and we have to accept. And I've talked about this before. I don't know. I get, again, this is not about Eric specifically, because I've seen a lot of people talk about this type of stuff. My good buddy Pete Overzet, who I think is better than me at this stuff, has talked about this kind of stuff. There's a lot of guys. And if you're wanting to balance things in those ways, you should listen to those people, not me. But I get asked a lot about my really high exposures. And I got asked recently as well about, what if you have, you're not getting enough of this draft slot? Do you then start to reach on players to get exposure to them because you don't have this first round player built into your portfolio enough? I don't make a worse decision for that particular draft if I think there's a tier break. Particularly, I will if I think it's like a legit coin flip, right? But I think that less things are a coin flip than most, first of all, even though I'm tier based in my thinking. I don't know if that's fair. Maybe I am fairly tier based, but if I think there's a tier break, I'm not going to bring somebody up and make a worse pick for that particular draft just to do something unique with one build. It's got to be an edge that I think is really significant. And in that case, it would be like, okay, well, I'll be pressing this edge in a lot of different drafts, but I'm not just doing it in one draft to build out correlation or whatever. And again, my reasoning is I think that would be overweighting my influence. Like, just because that's something I can control about my portfolio doesn't mean that the variance associated with having, too many ARSB Devonta Adams Cup teams. And then, there's a lot of variance with that. They could all bomb together. The variance associated with that is any different, in my opinion, than the variance associated with pod luck and with a lot of other things, injury luck, everything, right? Like, there's so many things that are out of our control, and we have to just get used to and willing to accept that the probabilities in a lot of, and that's not an argument for not thinking creatively about ways to manage things. But I'm just, again, there are gray areas here. And this is, for me, very similar to the 4% exposure blanket point, which I think is another great point that Jacob made, where it's like, if you show up in, week 17 with a team, you have one team. You drafted hundreds of teams who are all hoping to have like 1 or 2 or 3 teams at the end. So either you have your guys on that team or not, right? Like, the 4% exposure blanket doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have 100% exposure to whoever's on that one team you have left that made the BBM final. That's what it comes down to, right? Like, and so anyway, I just saw a funny comment that I'll get to in a sec, but that's the way I think through that, is like, I don't mind having some similar teams or having all of my exposure to one player built around, combinatorial stuff that's also dependent on a second player. Because if those teams all fail to get, like, the path where Devonta Adams bombs and it kills my Amon-Ra teams, like, so be it. I mean, that's just where I'm at. If I wasn't in on Amon-Ra anyway, then, like, balancing that out isn't going to really change anything. I'd have to really get lucky with my balanced out thing to then hit the nuts with the rest of it. The guys that Leg Up have written a lot about this. Pat Perrine has written a lot about this. A lot of the smart people that I follow in fantasy football, in best ball particularly, have talked about this offseason. At Leg Up, that Pat wrote about his, balancing exposures around his core players. So, like, his builds that had, like, last year, his example is he had a lot of Breece Hall and a lot of Jaylen Warren, and then he wants his builds around those players to be as balanced as his whole overall portfolio. So if he has 30% of Jaylen Warren or whatever, that 30% is also representative of the full 100%. So if there's another player in his portfolio that's 15%, that he also has 15% within that 30% that has Jaylen Warren, and 15% of his Jaylen Warren teams have that other guy. rather than 50% of his Jaylen Warren teams have that guy and none of his non-Jaylen Warren teams don't have that guy, or however that math would work out. And I understand that. It's just, for me, it's something that's like, I'm just willing to let the variance fall where it may on that. It's not like the juice isn't worth the squeeze, so to speak. Because I don't know that decision that I made on that one team, maybe I had the right combination of late round picks, and then that decision I made in the early round. This is why I'm taking Estime in the late round. All these teams, they're all different super flex teams. I only did 20 super flex teams. And when I get to round 20, I'm like, oh, I really like this CJ Stroud, Jalen Daniels team. If I'm right that Estime is severely undervalued as a 19th or 20th round pick, running back pick right now, and Stroud and Daniels and these stacks and everything that I did in the earlier rounds is right, and I got a lot of other stuff right, I want Estime on this team. I don't want to look back on it and be like, why did I take some shittier player over Audric Estime there? I mean, I think when you start to get into hundreds and hundreds of drafts, this stuff does matter. And it's likely the case that I'm just not at the volume that those guys are at to where I would want to start to have that consideration. Maybe when I draft that same team for the third, fourth, fifth time, it will actually click for me. Anyway, I don't even know why I went on that rant. For Marathon or Eliminator, do you ever think about interdivisional play? Yes, this is also very relative to a lot of the comments I made earlier about Eliminator. This was the one I laughed at from Taylor. Underdog Washington slow drafter single-handedly keeping the deli in Rainier, Oregon in business. Underdog is 4 small businesses. Love to see it. For those of you who don't know, we've already done some map chasing today, so let's do some more map chasing. I talked a little bit about this. Oh, I got to switch what I'm presenting. But our Washington friends that live in the Seattle area, we got to drive down I-5 to Oregon. But for those of you who don't know, the Columbia River is the border between Washington and Oregon. Right here by where it says Astoria is the mouth of the Columbia. The Columbia comes south right here, right? And then goes further west. It ends up going up into the state of Washington. I cross over it here at Vantage when I make the drive to Montana. It goes all the way up here. We have the Grand Coulee Dam. It's a wonderful river. I-5 comes down, and you would think you have to drive all the way to Portland. And I thought this kind of honestly before I had to make the trips to Oregon. Instead of driving all the way down to Vancouver, Washington, crossing over into Portland, this is the border along this river. It goes back up north here. And actually, you only have to drive down I-5 to Longview. You can cross this bridge here into Rainier. I talked about this on there's the deli. I talked about this on Ship Chasing the other day. This is the little deli. We're keeping it in business. They got these little tables here. You can actually can I zoom in? See the little booths there? This is like a truck stop that has, you can buy whatever normal truck stop stuff you would buy, but it's got these little tables, these little booths here. And this is literally, that's the bridge. You come off the bridge, you start driving, that crosses you into Oregon, this big old bridge, pull into this deli, sit down in these booths, make some underdog fantasy football picks, right? That's what the slow draft life is out here in Washington. Got a GM from Nick here. We're still at, I'm 45 minutes behind on the comments. Ben is a great point, has a great point here. Just because Zach Moss is a good pick at cost doesn't mean that Chase Brown's cost isn't low as well. That's absolutely the case. The Bengals' 2 running backs costs are undervalued, and maybe it's the Perrine risk. I don't know. Brian says he thinks Brown's a little too high and people are too confident about him. I'm not confident about him. It's an upside case. Like when you start to talk about 11th, 12th round running backs, you're talking about upside scenarios. I understand in best ball, you do want to try to do as much sure thing drafting as you can, but there's very little sure thing at running back anyway. But yes, Chase Brown could be this year's Rashad Penny, where I had a ton of Rashad Penny and he was a 0 on a lot of my best ball teams. I understand that. I don't think the Rashad Penny bet was ultimately entirely wrong. I probably hung on to it too late into August when the reports were bad. But ultimately, that bet is how you land on like Raheem Mostert and other things that were great costs as well. You focus on what the positive outcome, the ceiling outcome becomes. Bindles here a couple comments later says, B-Rob thoughts. I'm very in and haven't heard your take. I'm pretty out. We talked about it on Stealing Bananas this week. You're going to have a chance to hear that if you listen to Stealing Bananas. But the way that when we talked through it with Sean, the way that I came around to it mentally was like, so Nick says, so in on him, RG3 Alfred Morris version 2. I just don't see it that way. I think Washington's offense works if Jane Daniels is basically doing everything, or it's not going to work if Daniels isn't doing everything. The reason RG3 Alfred Morris worked so well is the read option was new at that time in the NFL, and they did a lot of read option. Teams don't do as much read option anymore because it's a lot more. I think defenses got a lot better at understanding how to defend it. They still do a decent amount of it, and they might do a decent amount of it. But I don't think Washington's actually going to do a lot of that with Jane Daniels. He's not as much of a read option quarterback as RG3 was. Jane Daniels is like a downfield passer, playmaking type. And I don't know that that's Cliff Kingsbury's offense either in any real meaningful way. Could be wrong. But I basically think Daniels is going to be throwing vertical or running. And then the Brian Robinson hype, like people have gotten hyped about some comments like that he's going to play some on passing downs. But like the comment was like from, I think Dan Quinn was like, it's, Coach Speak Index, I think had this. It was like, it's great that he's got Austin there with all, everything that Austin does in the passing game, and it basically was just like Austin Eckler is our passing downs back and Brian Robinson is learning behind him. And people were like, yeah, rocket ships on Brian Robinson. He's going to, they're talking about him in the passing game. Like they're not talking about him in the passing game. They're talking about the other back as the passing game back. And they're talking about Brian Robinson learning from him. If it's split, Brian Robinson's getting the early down work and Eckler's getting the receiving work. And it's not even like a very big pie for running back scoring because of the running back or the quarterback mobility. Like, I don't think of this as RG3 Alfred Morris 2. I think of it as similar to what the Eagles have been the last few years, where there's just not a lot of good running back scoring, man. Like, yeah, Miles Sanders had a decent year. That's the upside if you get like a real good rushing efficiency season. But DeAndre Swift was kind of a disappointment last year. You don't get a lot of receiving. And you don't even get a lot of touchdowns because the mobility of the quarterback can play in the red zone. But also the Eagles scored more points than I think the Commanders are going to score. That was the thing that I was saying is like either the Commanders offense flows through Daniels or it doesn't flow. Like it's just not good. I think Brian Robinson's elevating it. Anyway. That is my... Oh, interesting. Brian's comment on Brown was, I like him, have him ranked in the 30s in Dynasty, but not sure about the best ball confidence people have. I think the other way on this. Like, I would be more concerned about Chase Brown in Dynasty, where he could go to 0 if he doesn't get a role this year. In best ball, I'm okay taking the flyer because it's like I'm drafting a lot of teams. And I guess I think that a lot of the picks have risk and can be misses. And so, yeah, I might sink this one team, or hurt this one. It might not fully sink the team, might just hurt it. But it's worth it to try to build that perfect team, so to speak. This is a cool idea for that Eliminator thing that I'm not going to do because I've already written 2 different articles on the Eliminator stuff. But you might want to make an expected value column that's the prize money times the percent of teams that reach it. I think that would be a good move. Anyone who wants to do that, I can send you the table so you can build it out yourself. Consigliere says ceiling plays matter, but I think the structure should reflect barely getting there. Late tight end rather than elite tight end and hero running back rather than 0 is much more productive in the Eliminator. I disagree with both of those takes, and I wrote about them in my first article on the Eliminator. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but I this is a statement that he's making, that it's much more productive in the Eliminator. I disagree. I would be interested to see the evidence of that. We only have the 1 year. Maybe that was true from last year. I haven't read a lot of the other Eliminator content out there, and maybe that's on me. But in terms of the ways the structures actually work and what they're trying to do, and this is something that I consider a strength of mine, is understanding how structure works, why the past data tells you that stuff. And then as the market changes year to year and what the actual new season is telling us, how those structural edges that we've learned from the past can be exploited for the future. That's something that I feel like I've always been really good at, just to be blunt. So like I'm willing to be blunt in my take that I disagree with this. A good example of that, I guess, would be that last year I was sort of the dead zone running back guy for a long time and wrote about that. And last year I was heavily advocating for dead zone running backs in all formats. And it was a smash. It led to my most successful year ever in fantasy football. And as part of that, my whole draft strategy guide, which you can still find on bengretch.substack.com, I wrote all about it, detailed it round by round. As part of that, I said, you really want to be starting wide receiver to open up for the round 4, round 5 flexibility, because you can't be needing a receiver in rounds 4 and round 5. That was last year. And even though Christian McCaffrey smashed, right, like the wide receiver stuff was awesome, because then you did get Breece Hall and Travis Etienne. A lot of ceiling signal subs won their fantasy leagues last year. That doesn't mean I'm going to be right on this, what Consigliere has said here, but I disagree with both of these points. I think hero running back adds more risk than zero running back. One of the big cases that I made was that the point of zero running back is to get adequate depth at receiver in a way that creates redundancy and raises the floor. It also raises the ceiling if you can hit on the late round running backs, but it raises the floor. I understand conceptually why late tight end would be better than elite tight end. I disagree that could be the play in 2024. We've talked about elite tight end a bunch. You guys know that I think 2024 is a unique season. And so conceptually, I can understand why that might be. And these two comments are related. It really is like, okay, a lot of early receivers, what's your detour? Is it an elite tight end or is it a hero running back? He's saying he would prefer his detour to be a hero running back. And an elite tight end has risk to it as well. So we're not like as unaligned, but I think in the 2024 landscape, an elite tight end is almost table stakes, because I do think the tight end scoring is going to be higher at the top this year, or there's going to be enough good ones that you're going to have a hard time replicating that with late tight end. I know past data says you can. I don't believe that 2024 is going to be the same. But we talked about that a bunch. And that then means, okay, well, if you also wanted to do hero running back, now you have to take multiple detours and you're not getting adequate early round wide receiver depth, which is how you build floor and ceiling into a build, is adequate wide receiver depth. So the biggest thing I argued about structure in my first Eliminator piece was the receiver depth. And I said that I think zero running back in an imbalanced build is the best way to get floor. Really strengthen your wide receiver scoring, and then also hit the elite tight end and hit an elite quarterback if you can too. And then play zero RB and push zero RB even later than you would in any other format. Because really the reason you come out of the zero RB in the 8th or 9th or 10th round is for floor reasons. Not floor reasons. Sorry, it's for ceiling reasons, to still get some upside in the like DeAndre Swift range or whoever, Jalen Warren. But if you really were just trying to build a floor team that still had some outs, it would be an extreme zero RB team where you can get really dominant at QB and tight end along with the legit depth at receiver. And then you're basically saying, I'm not going to score any running back points, and I don't need to. Because if you really go look at the running back scoring year in and year out, and you look at not just points per game, but total scoring, and then factor that out. Like there's like we often look at points per game and we say, yeah, some of these running backs are really good, but they then got hurt. Like they missed time. There's other ones that have their spike weeks, but then have bad games otherwise. The running back scoring is just like the way that it plays out. You don't get buried other than by a couple of players. Like the true legendary guys can bury you, but especially like in a floor sense. That's why like zero RB to me has always been a strategy that when I talk to people about it in home leagues, I'm like, this is a high floor strategy too. Like you're going to make your home leagues playoffs. You're going to finish like 6th at worst in the regular season if you're in kind of a bad home league. just by structurally putting a lot of weight into the really great receivers and then hitting running back later. And then if you do hit on some of those late running backs, you're going to build a dominant team that can win as well. If you build a bunch of running backs into your roster early, they can all just bust and you just have no value in your team. And that's how you finish at the bottom. Now, that's not what Consigliere is saying. He said hero running back. He's not saying robust running back. But yeah, to me, especially, I could understand like a hero running back as a one detour if it wasn't what I believe 2024 is for the elite tight ends. And the bigger issue is I don't want to be detouring at all. I want to be building a lot of depth into receiver. That's how I assure myself of a floor of scoring in those receiver spots and the flex spot. Win the flex, right? And then I also want to win tight end and QB. And then my RB1 and RB2 spots are the ones where I'm comfortable not having good scores. And I think I'm going to have an overall roster of strong scoring that gives me a floor most weeks. Assuming some of the player picks are right, because sometimes you can just any structure fails if you have all the wrong players. But assuming some of the player picks are right and we make good decisions there and we actually build a good team, that roster will win in an eliminator. It will advance most cases. It will have a higher floor. And then what you need is running backs to hit and to bring in some running back scoring later in the year. I think 0 RB is the optimal strategy in the eliminator and an extreme version of it, not a more balanced version, a more extreme version of it where we further build in the contingency and the balance and the strength at every other position and avoid the risky running back position even longer. Because I think that helps your floor even more. It does make the question of like, how are you going to get your running back points later harder to solve? So it helps your floor, but it hurts your ceiling when you stay in 0 RB really long. But if you get it right, like last year, you had the 0 RB winner of the regular season scoring have Raheem Mostert and Kyron Williams. If you get it right late, if you get those types of plays late, I think you can win the whole thing. I think the eliminator could very easily be won by a 0 RB team. We'll see how that goes. Tyler, appreciate the super chat. I didn't even see this when it came through, but he says, thanks for the alpha and all my recent Javonte clicks ahead of week 1. I got him on Javonte. He noted in the chat recently. He says, if it blows up, this will become an invoice, though. Just FYI. Hopefully, Javonte doesn't blow up or I'll be paying him back for that super chat. Man, I am like, I get so far behind on the chat. Went for a run and I'm still cooking. I'm only at 127 right now, guys. Hour and a half. I'm going to be cooking for at least a little while longer. I do got to make this pick in the marathon. Those of you that are paying attention might have seen this clock tick down under an hour, and then I just been talking, and now it's under a half an hour. Let's jump into this. It's a back-to-back pick that's going to close this marathon build. Right now, it's a 3-5-6-2, but I have the 17-12 and the 18-01, the final 2 picks for this build. It's a Herbert, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones 3 QB build. I talked about Daniel Jones in this type of format when I was talking through him in the Eliminator a little bit ago on this stream. Jahmyr Gibbs, Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson on this pick. I mentioned I'm not really liking him. I have taken him some places. He's a great example of that thing I said earlier where you got to just draft a guy sometimes to see how it feels. Every time I look at this team, I'm like, why did I take Brian Robinson? I don't like this pick at all. Bucky Irving is the wide receiver or the running back 5 on this team. Man, I took Brian Robinson as a running back 4. I think he actually does make sense as sort of a high floor play if you don't have a running back yet. But I took Gibbs on this team, and I had already taken Aaron Jones. I took Javonte and Brian Robinson back-to-back at the 9-10. I guess you already had like Joshua Palmer off the board, Curtis Samuel, Tyler Lockett had gone off the board a long time ago. I could have went like Mike Williams. I already had 2 tight ends. This is one of the things you run into when you do a lot of 2 elite tight end stuff. I already had Trey McBride and Bowers The real pick there was Dallas Goedert or David Njoku. These guys were sliding. And Njoku goes 113 in this draft to Griffalicious. Let's see what his ADP was. Oh, I can't look at his team because of the draft caddies. How do I look at his team? I'm too zoomed in. That's what it is. Yeah. And Njoku went 10 picks behind ADP. Goddard went only 4 behind ADP, and Njoku went behind Goddard. Anyway, this was probably the Brian Robinson pick is because I couldn't take the value at tight end at that point of the draft. Could have maybe went Mike Williams, like I said, as a wide receiver 5. I'd take Brandon Cooks at the next turn. Man, these are bad receivers. This is a marathon format, but Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed, Xavier Worthy, Brandon Cooks, Quentin Johnston. Brandon Cooks and Quentin Johnston are pure routes plays. I don't really love the upside, but I basically said this is a team where I did take 2 elite tight ends in Trey McBride and Brock Bowers. I did take some early running back equity with Jahmyr Gibbs, then also Aaron Jones at pick 84. Aaron Jones was behind ADP. And after, so Rashee Rice goes at 82, JSN 77, Deontay Johnson 80. I would have loved any of those guys to make it to the 7-8 turn. They didn't. And so I couldn't go wide receiver at the 7-8 turn. That's a tricky thing about picking from 12 or 11 is if those guys don't make it back to you in the 7th, I think it's really hard to then go Sutton and Lockett at 83, 86. I think you can, but I think it's tougher to do than to pull the trigger on Rashee Rice. And so for me, it often becomes, okay, where am I going to go running back wise, tight end wise, take Bowers ahead of ADP, which I did here, which means if you're picking 12, you do probably want to have as much receiver upside early as you can. Maybe that's an argument for taking London over Gibbs at the 1-2 turn. I took Gibbs in this one. I took McBride ahead of ADP to get an elite tight end because you can't always be sure they'll make it back to 5-6. I could have taken Kittle at 5-6. So maybe at the 3-4, I should have went with, Tank Dell with Zay Flowers there. I don't love this build, in case you guys can't tell. I'm kind of trying to think through it. Okay, so I have put a bunch of receivers in the queue. I think I was trying to tell myself that this should be a 3-5-8-2, and I think that's what I'll do. I'll make 2 receiver picks here. Stick to 5 running backs. Gibbs, Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson. If Robinson's going to be a running back 4, it's a 5 running back build. I took Bucky Irving late. I don't need like Audric Estime in this build. I would be happy to grab him in most, but I have Javonte. Again, this is a marathon. If Javonte is the right pick, he's healthy for most of the year. He's producing. He's kind of the lead guy for Denver. You don't need any week 17 correlations in the marathon, obviously, but you do like some directional bets on offenses with your quarterbacks. So I have Chargers, Seattle, and Giants bets. That's part of the Quentin Johnston pick there. I didn't get JSN back to me, so I don't get a Seattle receiver, which maybe would have been. Why did I took Geno because he was 12 picks behind ADP and took Daniel Jones with him at the last turn, the 15-16 turn, and I decided to make this a 3 QB build. So I don't have a Daniel Jones play either, and that's why I have Darius Slayton at the top of my queue. He is the pick by ADP. I have Jalen Hyatt in my queue as well. Wan'Dale Robinson long gone. DJ Chark went. He would have been in my queue as well, I'm sure. Other picks near the top of the queue. Javon Baker is not a bring back consideration because, again, this is the marathon, but is the second highest receiver in the queue. Would build in some youth upside. Devontae Walker. This receiving room needs God, I just don't like this team. We're going to take Devontae Walker, and I guess I got to make a pick between Slayton and Hyatt. The right pick is probably Hyatt because if the Giants are actually just like really good and Daniel Jones is really good, like the young guys are taking steps forward, Hyatt would take a step forward. I don't have Malik Neighbors on this build. I mean, Hyatt being something would go a long way toward making Daniel Jones an interesting quarterback. Darius Slayton kind of is what he is. A lot of people have talked about Hyatt can only play in the slot. Now they have Wan'Dale Robinson, and Malik Neighbors even plays in the slot a decent amount. Slayton's more of a pure outside guy and has been good at the NFL level on the outside. Daniel Jones and Slayton kind of have already shown that connection. I have a really hard time with Hyatt's profile coming out of a pretty gimmicky offense in college. I know Sean Siegel still likes him a good amount, my Stealing Bananas co-host, and that gets in my head a little bit. Like, my true opinion is I'm just not that into Hyatt. I buy into the stuff where, like, yeah, he's probably a slot only guy, and their offense probably works better with other guys in the slot. But I mean, the thing about Hyatt is, like, this dude scored 5 touchdowns in one game against Alabama. Like, he had some crazy production, gimmicky or not. But I think I'm going to take Slayton with Devontae Walker. We're just going to get off of this team and pretend like it never happened. It's filled. It's done. So we filled 3 more teams today. I already had one that was down here in this team full range, but we're filling up a lot of these drafts. I'm running out of slows, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to make it back to Rainier, Oregon that we were just looking at on the maps, because I got kind of a busy week this week after the last trip. That just, man, I wish Underdog was legal in Idaho or Montana or Washington, somewhere where I traveled. Ball's life. You guys are getting back to my BM conversation earlier. Breaking fantasy analyst Ben Gretch takes dumps in under 50 minutes, prefers crosswords to BBM during BM. That's a good one. Firing off 10 picks while in Toyota is my happy place is a good one. Ball is life. This is the slow draft thing. The worst is when you have a bunch of picks to make before betting, you just mindlessly click because you want to sleep. Like, when you're tired, nobody wants to be making a bunch of best ball picks when they really just want to be going to sleep. That sucks. Who are the PPR cheat codes? Think rookie Jalen Waddle and Kamara last year for 2024. I mean, immediately the Denver running backs come to mind. I've talked about it a lot. I had someone else there who I thought would just get fed, but I can't. I have some answers to this, but they're not all immediately coming to. They're not immediately coming to mind. Tyler, good answer here. Fits in a lot of fast drafts because he works from home and needs to do multiple things to stay engaged in general. So it's kind of a personality thing. I'm more like, I have to do one task at a time, so it's tricky for me. But having no kids also a big thing. That's a great point. I mean, I remember life before kids. You had more downtime. That makes a lot of sense. Andrew asked, don't you think all those second round wide receivers are pretty flat in a tier anyway, so you'd want the diversified portfolio? This gets back to Eric's comments, and I was talking through the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp thing. I do think that's a good point, and Eric's example is probably not the best example because I do think it's relatively painless for him to make that correction. It was more, for me, it's more like is a juice really worth the squeeze type of thing to really be digging into my portfolio that granular of a level. Maybe it is. Maybe I should be doing more of that. But like, I'm sort of willing to just roll the dice that, like, okay, that combination is the combination that I like when I take Amon-Ra for whatever reason. Because sometimes it's like a player thing too. I don't know why Amon-Ra and Adams particularly would fit together, but like if I take Ayuk in the second round, it's more likely because I took him. Or I might take another receiver later that I feel stronger about their target floor. Because my issue with Ayuk is I think he's going to have plenty of weeks that are not really usable for a second round receiver because of the lack of overall target ceiling. We've talked through Ayuk in that sense. Well, then I'm more likely to pair him with, target earners And that's not a flaw in my portfolio. Like I drafted those teams that way for a reason. Like that's how I think that build fits together. That's how I want my Ayuk exposure to look. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But anyway, if it's a flat tier in the second round, which it very much is, we've talked through that. Then that's fine. Andrew goes on to note that most Amon-Ra builds are targeting San Fran wide receivers for week 17. So that's I think an argument for the Adams stuff where it's like you're getting a little bit of a unique element. I am scrolling through the chat now. There's a lot of, the thing is, when I spend all this time diving into, the thoughts at the depth that I like to get into, you guys in the chat dive into some depth with your comments, and there's some good ones, man. And it's hard to it's hard to keep up, and it's hard to read them. It's better when you guys are just talking about feet picks, right? If you're maxing contest, shouldn't you do everything in your power to be unique and try different things? We talk about how underwhelming the second round is. Shouldn't we take advantage of that? The second question, sure. The first question, no. Not in my opinion. I do not believe you should be doing everything in your power to be unique. Even if you're maxing. Maxing is 150 entries. My best comment on that would be when we think about DFS, which has been around a lot longer and has a lot more slates to analyze, because it's like every week is a slate. And so you have every year is, 20-ish plus slates, whatever. I said 20 include the playoffs or whatever, like main slates. There's also showdown. There's a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of people that win big tournaments maxing with 150 builds that are willing to kind of go all in on certain plays that they are really confident in. There are high stakes guys that every year try to balance a lot of their portfolio, but also go really heavy on certain plays. And that's like their whole strategy. I'm going to go really heavy on certain plays. I'm going to balance everything else. And it's not like necessarily specific to, I don't know what I was going to say there. It's not really a great point. But there are, this is this idea of like the 4% comfort blanket, or somebody up here used the term false comfort. When our teams don't win, it's easy to look back and be like, well, if I would have had more exposure to different players, I would have been good. Well, when you have more exposure to certain players, you're also losing exposure to others. My best year is when I've been pretty in on some good players. And I had last year, I had Sam Laporte on a lot of teams. I had Raheem Mostert on a lot of teams. I had like good picks on a lot of teams. And that gave me a lot of outs on those builds. When I was making the DFS point, my point was that you can't cover everything, even in DFS. And in DFS, you're talking about, and that's like famous. Like people famously will say that when you try to do your 150 builds, don't try to cover everything. You got to have a few things that you like and build around. That's in a week where all the parameters are known. Some of the teams are on bye and stuff. You're only playing with 9-man lineups, and a lot of it is stacked out. So like in DFS, you can better limit the things you need to get right by doing like game stacks and things. And so like one of your game stacks might be 5 of your 9 plays. And then it's like, okay, what are my other little mini stacks around that? And I'm basically trying to limit it to like 3 different little bets. Even when you do that, you can't build enough lineups to cover everything. So this idea of in an 18-round drafting format with 150 drafts, that by trying to do everything in your power to be unique and try different things, I don't. It's that false comfort thing. I think you're not going to be as it's a drop in the bucket. The amount that you increased your uniqueness, to me, is a drop in the bucket relative to, the bucket being all of the things that actually matter. Andrew says, would you rather A, draft the guy that falls 6 to 12 picks past ADP for differentiation, or B, go to the next guy a few players down that gives you a stack, or a week 17 bring back? I think these two things are very similar in their value, and it would depend on the players. That's the way that I would answer that. There's players that fall 6 to 12 picks past ADP that I don't want to take. There's players that I'm more likely to pull up for a stack or a week 17 bring back because I think they are the right fit for that type of build. I really want to get them into that build. I did that a little bit ago with a Wan'Dale Robinson pick where I was like, I had Daniel Jones. I don't have Neighbors. If I don't have Neighbors, I really want to get Wan'Dale on the team if I'm betting on the Giants. This is a good question. Doesn't always taking estimate hurt your ability to find Puka? A la scroll the F down. This idea of, if you're really maximizing all of your late round picks, you're not getting exposure to other potential late round picks. And that's fair. It goes back to this idea of like, of differentiation and balancing exposures and all that stuff. To me, again, though, like, having exposure, like if you really balance it, and because there's a lot of scroll the F down players, like you're not even balancing, like you're not even getting 8.3% all the players because some of them go undrafted in some drafts, right? If you really balance all the viable late round picks, you're probably winding up with like 5% or less on a lot of them. So what did you win when you got Puka on like 3% of your teams? You better really hope that the rest of that team was perfect. Like part of it is like if you found the Puka, you'd want him on 20% of your teams. And I'm not going to have estimate on 60% or anything like that. I'm taking a lot of him now. We'll see what happens with his price, and I'm not going to keep taking him forever. But my thing is like when I find a guy that I think is potentially a really key player for this season, I want to have a decent amount of exposure to him. So I'm willing to limit my exposure to other players in some instances that could be the other guy that is the key, so that I get enough exposure to the player that I think is a good bet to be the guy. There's some comment in Brian, dude, I was exactly like this. He goes, "Oh, love maps. I used to win geography bees as a kid, which really came in handy because now I'm unemployed." That's exactly. I at one point in my life, I could do the Sporkle where you name all 196 countries and their capitals. I could, Sporkle's that quiz website. I could do it. I could fill the whole thing out. Knew how to spell every capital too. Like some of them are crazy long and in different languages. Like the capital of Myanmar has like 3 different W's and Y's in it. The capital of Sri Lanka is a very long city. But like I just like memorized all this stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, you never use that. Like, I'm proud of myself. World famous burgers. This must be at the deli that I was looking at. I don't remember. I haven't tried the burgers. I don't remember seeing that, but maybe I will have to try a burger at some point. Good note here from Brian. He thinks the upside for Chase Brown, a narrow path compared to what others think. That's fair. Fair point. TJ says drawing the same second, third round pick if you only do a few drafts is understandable, but if you went 150, it feels like you should try to have some variation. That I agree with. I agree with like having variation in your exposure across your whole portfolio. My comment was about getting like really hyper specific to the few teams that you have, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown build on, and then how are you doing it from there, just on that small subset of your teams. Like I'm okay if some of my exposure overlaps there. I mean, it's a noble pursuit. We do stuff like that with our the combinatorial ownership stuff has become a big part of some of the things that we do with our playoff entries. We do a lot of playoff content over at Ship Chasing, and we enter in the FFPC, the playoff contest, and we care about the combinatorial stuff. But again, it feels like a lot of that is hard to really control. And even in the playoff thing, there's only a few options for each team. Like there's less options, so that it matters more there because there's less of a web of differences. But like in an 18 round draft, man, like you can't, like you don't know which team hits on the right combination of good plays that it's one of your best teams. And ultimately, the one that does is the only team that matters. So, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm just getting oh, man. So what happens with the comments is I scroll down and I'm almost to the bottom, and then it just, like, reloads a bunch more comments, and it's like, "Oh, no, you're still, like, hella behind." Um, is it a bad thing if you're continuously drawing the same spot in drafts? I've had pick 2 or 3 and 50% of my BBMs. This goes back to, like, my opinion on this is the answer is no. I I'm okay with it. I'm okay with and then I'm not gonna, like, draft Puka Nacua at number 2 just to get a Puka Nacua build. Like, this is just one of those random variance things. Okay, I'll build the best teams I can from picks 2 and 3. Like, I'm not going to take the same player. Like in this case, like the very first draft I did, I took Tyreek Hill over CeeDee Lamb. I'm not going to take Tyreek Hill at pick 2 every single time. I'm going to build CeeDee Lamb teams, but I'm going to take guys in that range. So like I'm not like against diversifying. To be clear, with a lot of my conversations, like obviously you should balance it relative to the situation. But if you have a bunch of 2s and 3s, you hopefully are getting some CMC. I don't mind you taking some Jamar Chase as well, or pulling up like a Justin Jefferson, even if you think he belongs there. But for the most part, you're just going to build different teams out of the 2 and 3 slot. And you could even have very similar, like you could take Malik Neighbors at the 2-3 turn and a bunch of those. If you are that confident in Malik Neighbors, like that's fine. There's still going to be a lot of different there's still going to be a lot of different elements to those builds. There's 18 roster spots, man. Like they're going to have a different stack. They're going to have different QBs. They're going to have different bringbacks. They're going to have different late round running backs, like a different tight end structure. Everything is ultimately going to be different. Like having 2 or 3 things the same about a couple different builds is not something to panic over, in my opinion. Especially if you're really confident in Neighbors, and maybe you're not confident in the second or third pick. Maybe that's the annoying thing is you keep getting the slot that you hate. But I still think you got to just like roll with the punches and make what you can out of those builds. This is funny. Consigliere says, how funny would it be if the slow king missed a slow pick talking about slow picks? Do it for the big equity. I almost did. I got us down to about 20 minutes. I could have kept going and just not paid attention. John asks, Pat brought up a great point with Eric that in the past with 0 RB builds, we typically grab 6 to 7 running backs. However, with the quality we can get now in the middle of drafts, okay to stop at 5. I think that's fine. I do think in general, my opinion is drafters stop at 5 running backs too much probably, because I don't mind thinking about running back as helping out my flex, and I'm taking so many early receivers. If you're talking about a 0 RB build, you don't really need 9 receivers either. I mean, you should have 5 or 6 in the first, early rounds. So, a 2-6-8-2 is fine. Maybe you want to get to a 3 quarterback build, and so you're going 3-5-8-2. But I don't even know if you could go 3-6-7-2. If you have 5 good receivers, you can stop at 7 receivers too. So that's a good question. The chat had been talking about it a little bit. Billy Jones says something like a 2-0-5-2 start and finishing at 2-7-7-2. I think that's viable for sure, but I don't think you have to go 7 running backs, going back to John's point. Let's see. A I think I'm close to caught up. On the chat, a lot of these are nice comments. I appreciate you guys. Lance asks, do you ever play do sit and goes? Do you think they're profitable? I can't actually enter fast drafts from my location. Now, I don't know if this is specifically asking what the FFPC sit and goes, if that's the case. I've done some of those. I can't enter those from my location either, though. But I've done some, as co-managed situations and things. I mean, the question about, like, do I think they're profitable is an interesting one. I think all fantasy is like profitable. It's exploitable, right? Like, that's why I do this for a living and spend a lot of time on it. Ultimately, like, that would be my real argument. And some of the ADP sets, I think Underdog is probably the most efficient ADP. So yes, I think if you're talking about other sites, I think they're more exploitable ADP markets, where you can look at Underdog even for some help, right? Like, this guy's going to like, my brother's been texting me about some drafts he does on a different site that I don't hear a lot about. I don't even remember the name. He's starting to do some early drafts, and Xavier Worthy, he got it like the 9-10 turn. And I'm like, what, dude? That guy's a 5th round pick on Underdog. And then he was asking me on a team where he took Nico Collins, like Malik Neighbors or CJ Stroud in round 4 or 5 or something. And I was like, I mean, Stroud's a 5-6 turn pick on Underdog right now, and Neighbors is a 2-3 turn pick. So even if I love the idea of stacking Stroud with Nico, like, that's an inequity across markets, where there's a different market over here with a ton of volume and a ton of drafters that's been hammered to death. And Malik Neighbors is going to the 2-3 turn. I know wide receivers go higher in that format than in the league my brother's playing in, but you could never draft CJ Stroud over Malik Neighbors just because their ADPs are closer on a different site and you have a stack. Like, you should be looking at the other markets and saying, well, Malik Neighbors is the pick here. So I do think from that perspective, there's ways to be playing other sites than Underdog and using what I believe is the most efficient draft marketplace at Underdog to your advantage at the other sites. Appreciate all you guys that are saying enjoying the strategy discussion. Dom, what's up, buddy? Enjoy having you around anytime we can get your time. Neil's in the chat. He finally caught up. Now he has a meeting. He said to answer a cue from earlier. He's planning on BBM today when I go visit him at 4 Eastern on his channel. Consigliere says having to scroll F down through Gretch's chat to answer flannel verse questions is meta. We got a 1999 super chat here. Appreciate you, Camp Jones. Puka was a waiver wire pickup for most, is looking past 200 round key. Baby McCaffrey on Commanders, or maybe even like a Chase Claypool. The answer to Puka is that there's not going to be a Puka. I mean, I know that's lame, but the part about like looking past 200, like you're looking past an ADP of 200 to find this year's Puka, and there just hasn't been, like in all of the other years, a guy going past ADP 200 that did anything like what Puka did. We talked about it on the Cowboys one where I titled the episode, this Cowboys receiver could be the next Puka, and people got mad at me because that's kind of a bait and switch, which it was. But you gotta spruce up the titles when you have a good one in mind. But we talked about how the Cowboys are like the most relative situation or most like comparable situation in that you only have one really strong target earner and no one else. Like, there's not a lot of teams that only have CeeDee Lamb and then like basically no one else that earns a lot of targets. People are talking themselves into Jake Ferguson, but he doesn't earn volume. He wasn't a massive producer in college. He's fine, but he's fine. He's a fine tight end. He's going to run a lot of routes. He'll catch some passes. He's going to be good. Like, he's not going to be bad. It's just too expensive right now. There's no one else on that team that earns volume in a meaningful way. Brandon Cooks really fell off last year, and you saw earlier on the stream that I've taken him in some leagues because the opportunity is undeniably there for somebody else to step up. And Cooks, has had enough good years in his career and has even bounced back from a similarly really bad year in his last year with the Rams, even on a per route basis. And then he bounced back the next year. So maybe he has a bounce back potential in him still. It's tougher at an older age, but the Cowboys situation is the one that is most comparable to the situation that Puka stepped into. But then there's also the element where Puka's profile was very unique, that they didn't run him on a lot of routes in college, and that's part of why he was overlooked. But if you dug into his per route stuff, his college targets per route run were very, very strong on the limited route sample. He did actually produce when out there. He did earn volume. That type of prospect typically doesn't exist because guys that are that good on a per route basis run more routes. Like the whole Puka college thing is crazy. And the fact that a guy could run only like 500 college routes across 4 seasons and across 2 different rosters, the season high for him was like 250 college routes, and then come to the NFL and in the first season in the NFL have a 500 plus route season in 1 year, match the number of routes he ran in his whole college career. Like that's crazy, right? That's never going to happen again. Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be a similar Puka, overlook. There can't be an overlooked prospect who smashes. That will happen again. That happened with Anquan Bolden. He was a little bit of a overlooked guy, although he was I believe, a second-round pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a 4th-round pick, overlooked prospect, has a great rookie year. There's the dudes that had the Michael Clayton, I think it was, had the really good rookie year, 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns. Oh, he was a first-round pick. Anyway, there will be overlooked players who have explosive rookie seasons and that kind of thing. But I don't know that looking past, ADP of 200 is the key. There's so many things that could be the key about what made Puka. And the more you dig into that stuff, like what Puka's college profile was like and what the Rams situation was like, the more you think through it and go, yeah, it's really hard to find that type of perfect run out set up again for anyone. And so that would be my concern. Appreciate the super chat there. Yeah, this might be true. Once the kids are out of school, I might be moving down south. I was already looking at moving to LA, like right after the pandemic. My kids didn't have as much stuff tying them here, but then market didn't really work in our favor when we were kind of make that move, and then kids started at their new schools. My oldest started at her middle school, found some great new friends. Tough to pick up and move when they have things tying them. You care about your kids, obviously. So anyway, we got to spin the wheel. That's where we're going next. Wheel of names. We're running out of teams. So I know you guys can never hear me talk while that's spinning. Green Bay Packers. It's time to remember some guys. Immediately start thinking of all those receivers in the Brett Favre era, the Antonio Freemans, the Robert Brookses, Mark Chimura was their tight end. Dorsey Levens was their running back. Bubba Franks was another tight end. Amon Green, Donald Driver as you start to get further up. Ooh, we got Amon Green in the chat from a couple people. Sterling Sharp goes back to the early 90s. Yeah, Sterling Sharp. I mean, people don't know about Sterling Sharp, who's still not in the Hall of Fame, and it's crazy. It's because he retired somewhat early because of an injury, but he only played 7 years. But look at his yardage totals: 1,412 in 89, 1,106 at 90. A little bit of a down year at 91, but then 1,413, 1,211, 1,119 and 18 and 94. And then his last season, he led the NFL with 18 touchdowns. Led the NFL in receptions 3 times in those 7 seasons. Led the NFL in touchdowns twice. Led the NFL in receiving yards once. He was in the MVP voting multiple times. He was 4th one year and 8th another year. 108 catches and 112 catches in seasons where guys weren't catching 100 balls as much. It's a different era. Dude was so good. Eddie Lacy. Eddie Lacy was actually good for a stretch. I like that one. That's a good one. Sam Congatto. Remember having him. Jordy Nelson, James Starks. Sam Congatto's now a doctor. Look at that. Jermichael Finley, Ryan Grant, John Kuhn, one of the all-time TD vultures. You got Greg Jennings, Jeff Janis. We already had Donald Driver, TJ Lang, Reggie White, Jermichael. We already said Mercedes Lewis, Al Harris, Javon Walker, dude, Geronimo Allison. This is maybe the best to remember some guys that we've had. Don Majkowski, Seneca Wallace, James Jones. I think he did lead the NFL in TDs one year. We got Randall Cobb, Najee Davenport, Julius Peppers, Clay Matthews, AJ Hawk, those dudes. If we're going to go on the defensive side, KGB, Kamir Bayamila. I don't remember how to say his name. My apologies. Who was I going to just... Oh, James Jones. I was going to see if he caught... That's not him. It's a different James Jones. Those years don't add up. This James Jones. Yeah, 14 TDs in 2012. Led the NFL that year. Robert Brooks. I mentioned him. Clinton Dix. Atari Bigby. My God, you guys. Nick Barnett. There are so many. And there's still some running backs you guys haven't mentioned. We said Ryan Grant. Who's this one? Brandon Jackson led the team in running in 2010. We have Eddie Lacy, Green, Starks, Ty Montgomery. Sam Congatto season was 2005. Dorsey Levens, I think I mentioned. Edgar Bennett. That's more back in the 90s. Maybe you guys got the majority of the running backs. Eddie Lacy's a good one. Oh, Cedric Benson. That's one that I was kind of remembering. There was definitely some... Benson had his stretch too. Rodgers' running backs were always good. Cough. Breece Hall, cough. Jay Sternberger. Oh, man. Good names. Good names. Good names there. We got all the good receivers, I think. Oh, Javon Walker. I think somebody said him. You guys fired off some names. Oh, man. Bill Schroeder was their leading receiver in 2000 and 2001. I started fantasy football in 99. I do remember Schroeder being fantasy relevant in my really early years. White dude. Don't get me started on Josiah Degura. The types, hashtag comments only heard at the Stealing Signal channel. Sammy Watkins, Matt Flynn, Micah Hyde. Such good names. All right, let's go talk about the Packers. The Packers are a tough one to discuss. The biggest thing that I've talked about, the 2024 Packers, the biggest thing that I've talked about with their receiving core, which is a tough one to discuss, is that last year, going into training camp, so this is their current depth chart. Every single player on this depth chart is at least a class of 2022 guy. The numbers next to him show the year and then the round pick they were. If it's like SF street free agent 23, CF is a different type of free agent in 24. But these are rookies. Isn't Alex Magoo a quarterback? Wasn't this dude a quarterback in like the UFL? And now he's changed. He's going to play wide receiver for the Packers. I don't know. That's weird. Bo Melton was taken off the practice squad from Seattle, but he was also a member of the 2022 class. I'm pretty sure Heath was as well. If we go back, they have the archive dates here. At the start of camp last year, like August of 2023, they had 11 dudes on their roster, and all of them, if you went and looked up all these names, were either class of 2022 or class of 2023. They were all rookies or second-year pros. All 11 dudes they invited to camp, and then certainly by the time they went into the season, the guys that made the team were all very young wide receivers. And that is why, in my opinion, this is why you wound up with sort of a lot of uncertainty in the Packers wide receiver room throughout the year. A lot of I'm trying to pull up their routes right now. In the early part of the year, you had, in week one, there wasn't a single wide receiver that ran more than 67% routes or a route on more than 67% of dropbacks. Dobbs quickly elevated. Then in week 6 after their bye, like he dropped back down. Dontavian Wicks was already comfortably in the like 60% range. Then he dropped down for a little bit, then was back up late. Jaden Reed for most of the year, solid with his routes numbers, but actually fell off a little bit towards the later part. Christian Watson didn't play much early. And then by the time he came back was sort of the team high for most weeks, but then didn't play late either because he got hurt. There's a big question about, I don't want to archive this. I'm going to go back to the normal. What did I do? Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the Packers depth chart. This is our current depth chart. We've talked a little bit about Dontavian Wicks. Not a ton. We got to go to the yards per out run database next. But yeah, I figured that Watson, like they have Wicks here behind Reed in the slot, which is interesting. I feel like Wicks and Dobbs are competing for one spot on the outside. Let's check Dontavian Wicks' profile. I missed the V. So he was in the slot on 36.5% of his snaps last year. That doesn't, to me, scream slot role. I mean, a lot of slot guys aren't in the slot a ton, but Jaden Reed was in the slot 75%. Wicks was out wide 63% of the time. Romeo Dobbs. I'm going to put Christian Watson here. I'm going to start hiding some columns or rows so I can get all these guys on the screen at once. Give me just a second so we can talk through the target profiles of these guys. So what we have is a bunch of young players. Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs were the only ones who had played in 2022 of the main four. Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed were rookies last year. They both have 2+ yards per route run right away as rookies. Reed does it on even more routes. His ADOT was actually pretty solid. He earns volume. He's efficient. Like Jaden Reed is good at football. There's a reason he's being drafted the highest of all of the Packers receivers. Christian Watson had a really good rookie season, 2.26 yards per route run. Last year, he's all the way down to 1.56. The targets per route run fall way off. I argued that they were really trying to kind of force feed him volume in Rodgers last season. That didn't seem to exist as much last year, but he was also playing hurt. People have talked a lot about the hamstring injuries, obviously. And last year, his ADOT was even higher. 14.3 as a rookie is really high. It goes up even higher to 16.7 last year. A TPRR of 20% at a 16.7 ADOT is fine. This is a good weighted targets per out run of 0.60. It's actually better than Jaden Reed's with a 23.3% targets per out run at a 10.3 ADOT. You're talking about a 0.59 weighted targets per out run. Watson, when you factor in those air yards, actually had a little bit stronger weighted volume, fewer targets, and the targets matter more, but those targets had air yards on them, right? The efficiency, not great when you consider the ADOT. You'd expect it to be higher. It was higher his rookie year. I think he can be an efficient player. He's an interesting bounce back candidate for sure. Dobbs is the one that I'm most concerned about. You see these 2 yards per hour run at 1.36, 1.32. He's earned volume. He has not been efficient. Not with Rodgers, not with Jordan Love. All the other receivers last year were better in yards per target. And the same is true the year prior, essentially. And when you watch Dobbs, like he has issues with some of the things that you kind of need to be able to do as a wide receiver. He has issues with the sideline. There's a lot of plays where he just got his foot out of bounds, didn't have awareness, and lost a catch as a result. There's a lot. He has issues with hands. He'll juggle balls and then go out of bounds and lose a catch for that reason because he didn't catch it cleanly. There's a lot of stuff that he struggled with. He had a great playoff game or playoff run. We'll look at that in a sec, but he's the one that you look at this and you say, okay, we have 2 years of a sample. I don't feel great about it. I do feel a lot better about looking at it. Wicks's 1 season at a 2+ yards per run, although it's only 285 routes. But I mean, for Dobbs to already have over 800 routes and really not have shown much, especially on the efficiency side, he's earned volume. But if the volume goes, like if the routes go, if Wicks takes some of that, that's a pretty big issue for me. I mean, chat's noting that Dobbs always seems to be on the field. Maybe the coach loves him for the way he run blocks, stuff like that. I agree. But I also feel like a big part of the reason he was on the field so much last year is he was the second-year receiver that knew the system, and they went into the year like, you know, Dobbs is going to take a step forward this year, and then he didn't do it. And Wicks is the rookie who has the really strong year, and now it's like, okay, well, Wicks, they're talking about Wicks, they're comparing him to Devontae Adams. Like Matt LaFleur, the head coach, is comparing him to Devontae Adams. That's a big deal. So I would be concerned about that. I think Watson keeps this high ADOT role, right? I think that element of it is going to be there regardless. I think Jaden Reed keeps the slot snaps that, you know, he's the clear slot guy, 75% slot. He keeps a lot of the manufactured touches, the touches around the line of scrimmage. I do think one of the cases I've made with Reed's volume in particular is that maybe it was a little bit inflated by the fact that no one else had really stepped up. But if you get to a situation where, like, say, Dobbs loses some snaps to Wicks and Wicks is taking that step forward, Christian Watson is earning a lot of volume down the field because he's healthier, that Reed's particular type of volume might cap a little bit because he is a slot guy, because there's a lot of manufactured motion touches. I think some of that could stay. I don't think it's definitely all going to go away. And I think Reed's good, but he is a little bit overpriced for me. I'm not going out of my way to get a ton of him. I take some of him as like a higher floor play. I think he's going to be good again this season, just not necessarily my favorite way at cost to play the Packers. I would rather play it through Wicks or through Watson, who I've never really been in on, but we do get a nice price on for a guy who I think could, you know, if he's healthier, could maybe be somewhere in between these two numbers. Like this is his average weighted targets per out run, 0.64, somewhere between these two targets per out run numbers from years 1 and 2, where he's like around 22% at a high ADOT, and he can get to like a 0.65 weighted targets per out run with some efficiency, yards per out run of 1.91 in that case. That would be a really good year for Christian Watson if he can pull that kind of a season off. So yeah, I mean the pro case for Dobbs would be that he's already in the role and that he can stay in the role and that he had a really good playoff game and he can build off that. Those stats, for the record, do not include the playoffs. I should include them, but I don't, because I want the routes numbers to be like, I don't want there to be, when I look at a player's career, I want to know how many routes he ran each regular season. If I go to their one playoff game, Dobbs went 6'6", 151, 1. Ton of efficiency, right? He earned 6 targets on only 21 pass attempts, so the targets per route was good too because they didn't throw a ton because they were so explosive. But he also catches all 6 balls, goes for 151. The yards per target are through the roof in this game. So if you include this game, his yards per target is much stronger. I was just talking about how the efficiency's not been there, but we get and then he also has a 6'4", 83 game. So his playoff yards per target was 19.5 on 12 targets. If you bring that into his 96 other targets, 108 total targets, 674 plus the 234 divided by 108, it's an 8.4 yards per target instead of a 7.02 is his regular season number. I mean, he was much, much more efficient in the 2 playoff games, which is a great sign, obviously. You can't really deny that. They end up being basically his 2 best games of the year. His only other higher yardage game all season came in week 3 where he did it on 13 targets. He wasn't super efficient. He had 2 great games on 6 targets apiece in the playoffs. So that's, I mean, if you want to make a case about Dobbs, you can make that case. I think there's a lot that's open. Oh God, I'm showing you guys the wrong screen. I'm sorry. I have such a habit of opening in a new tab. This is the screen I had just been looking at. These are his 2 playoff game logs. 6'6", 151, 6'4", 83. He had 234 receiving yards in his 2 playoff games, only 674 for the whole regular season. And if you look at his regular season, yardage, his high was 95 yards in week 4. Both of his playoff games surpass that. They wind up being 2 of his best seasons. This is, I think, the consensus. Reed's role is established. Watson's role is established. I think Wicks eats into Dobbs' snaps share a little bit more in year 2. I am not. I mean, the market currently is pretty high on Wicks, but you still can get some good prices on him. I could see a scenario where his price could get so frothy that Dobbs would be the way that I'd want to play this suddenly if Dobbs got a lot cheaper, because Dobbs probably is the incumbent to be playing in those spots. Now, I would like to have seen a better year from him in the first 2 years, and I do feel like he's not likely to be a star. Like, he just wasn't super efficient over these first couple of seasons, and Wicks is that guy that feels like after that really strong, limited sample of routes in his rookie year, could just be a stud, like could just go forward from there, really have that connection with Jordan Love and really build on that. And that's another thing that is kind of a negative for Watson is his better season came with a different quarterback. Last season, yes, he was banged up, but also didn't seem to have the same type of connection with Love that he had with Rodgers. Doesn't mean he was bad with Love. But if you want to bet on the guys that had really good efficiency and good seasons last year in this offense with the current quarterback, are probably the best bets, and that's Jayden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. So I understand why that's where the hype is from the market, why those 2 are more pricey. I just think there's a wide range of outcomes here in terms of what happens next. And for Reed, the 94 targets, the strong numbers, if Christian Watson is earning more volume because he's healthier throughout the year, I think that starts to cut into like some of the stuff that Reed did. If Wicks is doing more, that probably cuts more into Dobbs. But I'm basically just saying that part of why Reed was so clearly the number 1 guy was that there wasn't a lot else established, or at least that's my take on it. Then you have the tight ends, who I meant to look at over here as well. But you have Luke Musgrave, who despite a really young group, I mean, he was also a rookie, but didn't really earn a lot of volume, didn't step into a big volume role here. I wrote Tyler Kraft instead of Tucker Kraft, but he's banged up and might miss some time in the regular season. He was even worse, 13.2%, 16.4% targets per out run for Musgrave. Kraft was at least efficient. Their yards per out run are similar. Musgrave, I don't think I'm like completely out on, and there are paths to him taking a step forward in year 2. We know that tight ends take a little longer to develop. Trey McBride wasn't even great as a rookie, right? If Musgrave takes a big step forward with Kraft banged up, he is one of my favorite later on tight ends because I think there's an option for him to take a step forward and earn some volume as well and be a bigger part of this discussion than people realize. He honestly might be the best way to play the Packers passing game because Wicks has gotten so pricey, Dobbs has stayed pricey. Now Musgrave is the value way to buy into this passing game. The other big part of this discussion is Jordan Love. And there's a lot of us like certainty that he's a star. And maybe he is. But I want to go to his 2023 game log and just like, he was great early, these first two games, but they only threw 25 and 27 times. They kind of hid him a little bit. They got out ahead. Well, they end up losing in week 2, but they don't even call a high pass rate. He completes less than 60% of his passes in both games. I was writing and stealing signals to kind of fade him going forward because you had a 6 TD element that was really buoying the rest of his profile not being as strong. The yards weren't really there. Completion percentage wasn't really there. The volume wasn't even there. They start throwing a little bit more in the ensuing weeks, but you see like a big change in the TD rate and the interception rate. Suddenly he throws a lot of picks. For the next 5 games, he throws at least 1 pick. For the next 7, he has 8 TDs and 10 picks. It's a really tough stretch. He's still not completing more than 60% of his passes during that stretch. The reason I'm highlighting only up to there is from then on, he goes 18-1 TD to interception ratio. So that's a tough stretch. This is an elite stretch. He throws 18 touchdowns in 8 games to close out the regular season. And then he goes in the playoffs and he throws 3 TDs, completes 76% of his passes in game 1, and absolutely runs Dallas out of their own stadium. The next week, he plays incredibly well against San Francisco for like 3 quarters, but he ends up throwing 2 pretty costly picks in the second half. Big part of the reason that they lost. Ryan says LaFleur opened the playbook halfway through the year and good things happened. That is the convenient explanation, and I'm not rejecting that explanation. I want to be perfectly clear. I am rejecting any certainty that we know what Love is at this point. I'm not certain. I think it's likely that he's very good, but there are some Packers fans that get really mad about like, there's been this Jordan Love CJ Stroud rivalry, and I've seen a lot of Packers comments in the chats and on Twitter and stuff about like Love isn't getting as much love as CJ Stroud. And I just think that's like a silly way to look at it personally. That Stroud was a rookie, 2nd overall pick, and was an absolute stud from day one. I don't think Love had a really strong stretch. I don't think you can even, his numbers actually wind up, I think, a little bit better than Stroud's in some ways. I don't think you can have looked at the games and watched the games and felt as confident about Love being a long-term NFL star as you had to feel about Stroud. I just think that's a different conversation, personally. These are 2 interesting comments. You know, the Stroud over Love easy. That's kind of basically what I'm saying. Raphael says Love sounds like a young Dak. That's an interesting point as well. Like, I think that's a pretty good comp. Those final 8 games as well, completes over 70% of his passes. I was talking about in the early going, he was completing less than 60%. He was fantastic down the stretch. Ryan mentions that again. 2nd in TD passes after the horrendous start. Basically, my point is this is a small sample, right? It's 8 games. I think LaFleur is a really good coach. I think he set up this offense to be really successful in a lot of ways. I think he found answers for Love and for his receivers. And I think we saw that particularly in the first playoff game against Dallas, where they absolutely shredded Dallas. But they did so on only 21 pass attempts. They really took the air out of the ball after being super successful passing it, to be clear. I guess what I'm saying is I still would like to be certain that teams have had time to make adjustments to whatever it was that LaFleur was doing differently in the second half, and Love still had answers, etc. Because the first half of the year, particularly this stretch, wasn't good. And Love was, was so good for a stretch of time where, sometimes guys and teams are just sort of hot, where they find something and they're pressing advantages. And I feel like one of the things the Packers did incredibly well last year is when they had an advantage, they pressed it. Like Love had the 2-3 TD passes in weeks 1 and 2, and then some defenses had some answers, and then they found some answers back. And in all these games, they're like multiple TDs, and they're really pushing it. The completion percentages are incredible. That carries into the playoffs. But like, for example, this 49ers game worries me a little bit, where Love was awesome, looked completely unstoppable. I was so bought into Love's going to go win the Super Bowl this year up until he throws 2 really bad interceptions late in this game. They have a lead at halftime. Let's go to sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but the Packers have a lead at halftime, or no, they're down 7-6 at halftime, excuse me, but they massively outplayed, and they didn't do as much as they should have with their opportunities in the first half. What happened with their possessions? I'm trying to remember this game in real time a little bit. They settled for a field goal on a 14-play, 58-yard drive to open the game. Then they turned it over on downs on a 10-play, 68-yard drive. Then they settled for another field goal on a 10-play, 64-yard drive. 3 drives of 10-plus plays, at least 58 yards, and they get 6 points. That's obviously a pretty big bummer. The first field goal comes at the 11-yard line. The turnover on downs comes at the 14. They went for it on 4th and 1 at the 14. And then the other field goal comes at the 11-yard line. All 3 drives get inside the 15-yard line, and they're only able to get 6 points. So they're down 7-6, and you're like, man, they missed their opportunity. They're outplaying the 49ers, and they're only down 7-6. And then they come out to start the second half, drive right down, score a touchdown. Niners answer with a touchdown. Packers answer with another touchdown. Get a 2-point conversion, and now it's 21-14 late in the third. And they've looked like they can't be stopped. They're moving the ball at will. Those drives were, well, the second one was only a 20-yard touchdown drive. That must have been after a turnover, after a long punt return. It looks like the Niners didn't have a turnover, so I don't know. Anyway, they have one long 75-yard TD drive to start the second half, and it's all Love, and he's playing incredible. He hits Bo Melton for a TD. The Niners are able to answer pretty quickly. George Kittle, 32-yard catch. Christian McCaffrey, 39-yard touchdown run. They did get a 73-yard kickoff return, and so they had a short field after that and score a quick touchdown as well. But again, I mean, quick TD. They get the 2-point conversion. Love looks absolutely incredible at this point. And then this interception on the next drive after they get a stop on the Niners was a bad pick. It was just an outright bad pick. It was 3rd and 11, but they needed to, not give up a short field there, and it was a bad throw. I can't remember the exact play in my mind, but I remember being like, both of Love's picks weren't great. They get a field goal, the Niners, and now it's 21-17. Get a 3-and-out. The Niners punt back. Get another punt. You get the Niners scoring a TD. It's 24-21 in the fourth, and he throws another pick. This one more in desperation mode, but they just needed to get to, actually not really desperation mode. They just needed to get to field goal range. They're down 24-21. There's a minute left. He throws another pick in the middle of the field. My point is, it seemed like the Niners did something defensively, disguised some stuff. Both those picks were Dre Greenlaw, a linebacker in the middle of the field. They had some answer for something that the Packers were doing well, and Love didn't read out those plays particularly well. That doesn't mean Love couldn't then have answers coming back. The point is just that the sample of Love being elite was smaller, and it was so strong that I think people are very certain about something. I think LaFleur's a really good coach. I think he's going to continue to have answers. I think the Packers passing game is probably going to be very good this year, but I'm at least a little bit hesitant, especially about Love's price, because he's not a huge runner. He had 247 yards and 4 rushing TDs last year. Not amazing. The chat mentions that Green Bay only had 4 running back rushing TDs last year, that there's an argument that Love is just as good as he was last year, but his numbers regress. That's essentially the argument that I'm making. Love had 4 rushing TDs. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones each only had 2. Jaden Reed had 2 of his own on some jet sweeps. It's a tricky discussion, this whole team. Like Ryan here, he mentioned he's a Packers fan. He said it's almost as if Green Bay and San Fran are closer than people think. I reject that. I think San Francisco played very poorly in that game. They went on to play better later in the postseason, played well in the Super Bowl. I think they played a really poor game, and Green Bay outplayed them that day. considerably and should have won. And it's a huge bummer they didn't win for Packers fans and just for like fairness. I think they outplayed them. They deserve to win. But I am not as confident that the LaFleur offense and system is going to have the answers that Shanahan has. I'm not as confident as the market is, or as Ryan seems to be. Yeah, I mean, like the Fantasy Football Garage says, is Purdy's ADP undervalued compared to Love? I think so. I feel much more confident in Purdy's TD rate continuing into 2024 than Love's 5.5% in his first year as a starter, which was really strong and really back-weighted and could be a sign of monster things to come. I mean, these might be words that I eat later, but I'm basically trying to just emphasize that I haven't heard a lot of pushback on the idea that Love is like one of the elite young stars. And I think it's at least possible that this stretch in 2023 is an elevated part of what he is going forward, that he's not, the same type of superstar that he looked like down the stretch last year. So it's tricky. His price for me is tricky. I don't think the rushing is really going to buoy it, and I don't know that he can have the same huge passing numbers. The receivers' prices are all sort of tricky. I've talked about the ways that I do want to play it a little bit. If I'm playing them, the fact that the running backs weren't very good last year in this offense is notable to me. And in particular, that like the Packers backs that have been good over the years, you had Rodgers at the line making a lot of, changes to the calls and audibles and putting them in, I think, good positions, throwing to them effectively. I'm not saying Love didn't do any of that stuff. Just think Rodgers did it at a really high level. Defenses really had to respect Rodgers passing. I think they'll respect Love, but I don't know to what degree. So there's a lot of questions there. Josh Jacobs, a player that, as we talk about him, it's really hard to understand like his efficiency and how it bounced around. This year in 2022 was so good. You look at his yards per carry, 4.9 that year. It was 4.0 or lower the 2 years prior. 4.8 as a rookie on a little bit less volume. 3.5 last year. So it drops back off. It's really like 2022 was this crazy efficiency year on a ton of volume. And then it falls back down last year. It wasn't as good prior. He was also in yards per target over to the right. That was a career high for him, as well as his rookie year. The other 3 years of his career, 5.5 yards per target or worse. 2022 and 2019, the only years where he was solid in yards per target. He was above 6 both years. It's a meaningful difference. The average for running backs about 6.0. So he was slightly above average those 2 good years. Solidly below average the other 3 years. And yet he led the NFL in total yards just 2 years ago and was, a 393 touch guy. And then this past year back down to 270, kind of get that element of like, yeah, he was coming off a huge workload. He wasn't really happy with the Raiders. He didn't sign his franchise tag until, they gave him a different little 1-year deal later in the summer. Maybe he wasn't as, working out as hard or taking things as seriously last year because he was frustrated about not getting a long-term deal. Now he has that. Does that influence things? The Josh Jacobs question is so hard for me to understand, but I do know that Marshawn Lloyd is a guy that, had a bunch of big plays in college, exciting player, not a ton of volume in these college numbers here. Never had more than 116 carries in a season, but 9 rushing touchdowns each of his final 2 seasons. And the efficiency, the rushing average was really, really good last year with USC, which could be in part just that teams were focused on Caleb Williams. Again, the way that teams play the quarterback can influence rushing efficiency, but he had some explosive runs, some explosive plays. They took him in the 3rd round, which is the big part for me. They've talked about him as like wanting to have him in the conversation for in the rotation and playing a decent amount. He was the RB4 overall in the draft this year, one of only 4 that were taken on day 2 before day 3. And so there's some actual draft capital committed there. They lose Aaron Jones. They bring back A.J. Dillon, but they more or less weren't going to re-sign A.J. Dillon. They let him walk. He didn't find anywhere to go, so they bring him back on a 1-year deal. It's got a $2.5 million base salary, but the dead money is only $167,000 was his guaranteed money up here, fully guaranteed up above the ad there, $167,500. They could cut him and save like over $1 million, or they could keep him, and they might. But this isn't even like a contract. This is a 1-year contract. This isn't a contract that you should be super worried about, in my opinion. So I think they're out on him. Like Andrew says, the Packers backs were bad because Jones gets hurt and Dillon is bad. Okay. I think, we know by now that A.J. Dillon's probably not that guy. But anyway, I'm drafting a lot of Marshawn Lloyd. I think he's going to have standalone value. I think there's, enough concerns about Josh Jacobs' profile. He's just a lot more expensive. So, I don't really want to buy into a 26-year-old back that wasn't efficient last year, and has efficiency questions even at his younger ages. So yeah, sorry, I'm just getting a little tired. I feel like I'm not being super sharp in how I'm talking through the Packers, but my main point is I just don't really love the price on Jacobs, and I like playing this backfield. I do think that the Packers backs could be good, and I like playing that idea through Lloyd, who's a lot cheaper. Dom apparently likes Josh Jacobs. He says talk about the fumbles in reference to Lloyd, and then says Josh Jacobs goes after Jaden Reed sometimes. You can get him at a discount sometimes for sure. Yeah, I love this. He changed his number. That must be the issue. He was 28 in his great season. He went down to 8 last year. Definitely part of the problem there. All right. That's kind of my take on the Packers. It's not a great one. It's an offense that has a lot of excitement, and the market is playing into that excitement. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with the young receiving core, including a year 2 tight end. I think there's a lot of, and including just playing time and how these guys mesh and go forward. And so I usually want to play the uncertainty through cheaper prices, which is why, I mentioned not loving the Jaden Reed price, even though I like the profile and how good he was right away. All the way down to Musgrave, you got 5 guys that are draftable and matter and are potential young breakout candidate profiles, but they're all on the same team and they can't all break out. And Jordan Love himself is a young player where sometimes you see the sophomore year, not sophomore year because he's been playing for a few years, but the step back in a second year as a starter. Dom says when he slips toward the end of 5 and you start 0031 or 1030, what's not to like? Meaning 3 receivers and 1 tight end or QB. To me, what's not to like is the lack of a 4th receiver through 5 rounds. I mean, I don't think Josh Jacobs is a superior play to even Javonte Williams, who I can get later, and the 2v2s that I can get off the wide receiver I can take in the 5th round, or the tight end I can take in the 5th round if I haven't taken a tight end yet. That's structurally, that's the thing is I actually think Josh Jacobs, we did an activity over on Ship Chasing a couple weeks ago. We talked about the guys that we don't have a lot of exposure to and we're worried about it, because there's guys that I don't have exposure to and I'm not worried about it. I think it's an intentional play. I don't like that guy. I put Josh Jacobs on my list as one of my top 5 guys that I don't have a lot of exposure to, and I'm worried about it. And because I do think he could have a really strong season. But the big reason for me was I don't take a lot of him because of structural reasons. I think the elite tight end is more important in that range. And I think if I've already gotten an elite tight end, or I think I can get one on the way back, I think the additional wide receiver is more important in that range. The detour that I'm going to take through 6 rounds or 7 rounds is more likely to be it's definitely more likely to be the tight end. And then it's potentially a QB, or if I take one in the early rounds, it's potentially a running back because I want to like. It's just hard to get enough exposure to all the early round running backs because I don't want to take a lot as a group. And so the ones that I am going to take some of, for me, it winds up being Achane. It winds up being Kyron Williams, who I think are improperly priced in the third round. They should both be second round picks. I'll take obviously some first round running backs with like a Christian McCaffrey, and then those teams I'm not going to be taking a Josh Jacobs because I need to get receivers back. And so like, I mean, Dom obviously is specifically talking about when he has 3 receivers through 4 rounds, but I still think I want a 4th receiver at that point. So it gets to be tough to get enough exposure to all of the running backs as a group. He's saying Pacheco over Jacobs as well, which I think is interesting. Talked about the 601 to the 604 is where you can get some more receivers. It's it's just tricky this year to get enough detours into those early rounds to get enough exposure to the running backs. The guys that I'm landing on more are the Achans and that stuff. Or if I get to this part of the draft, I don't take them. So that's why I said that Jacobs is the guy that I worry about, because I do think he could be a strong play at a 5th round price tag, but structurally it's a really, really difficult thing for how I want to be building and what I feel comfortable with in terms of the strength and the depth of my wide receivers and those things. Mackin says, how do you reconcile the asymmetric upside of the Packers offense relative to a brand new unestablished Bears offense and the prices you have to pay there? I don't see asymmetric upside with the Packers offense. Asymmetric upside to me means that there's way more upside at the cost than downside. Jordan Love is going as like the 3rd or 4th, like pretty pure pocket passer. The only quarterbacks going ahead of him are mostly mobile guys. To me, there's legit downside there. The pocket passers that we've seen fail in those ranges coming off of a spiked TD rate season, like the year after Matt Ryan was the MVP, he shot up in ADP, and then his past TD rate fell, and then he comes back down. Like, past TD rate is not a very consistent stat, and because we only have the small sample on Love, people think it's going to stick. That's basically my whole argument is like past TD rate can bounce around, and you're really betting on Jordan Love's past TD rate staying high and not coming back down to earth a little bit the next season and him showing out to be like a Matt Ryan level player. Matt Ryan didn't typically go as high as Jordan Love did for most of his fantasy football, years, or his years as a fantasy football asset, especially when there was enough mobile quarterbacks to float the way that there is now, the earlier QB spots, the QB1 through QB5 spots and that kind of stuff. Benny says Matt Ryan was an even years QB. It's one of those guys where the past TD rate would bounce around. That's why he's a good example of that. Matthew Stafford can be that way, but those guys often they settle into like they often go like QB14 in certain years, right? So I actually think there's like some real downside there. This is a good point though, Andrew. Like the Bears receivers are all going higher outside of Reed going over at Dunze, and I buy, like, I just think the Bears are overpriced collectively. I've talked about DJ Moore being too expensive. So anyway, I think there's an intriguing question there. I guess, I balk at the asymmetric upside comment because I do think there's downside with the whole Packers offense too. I think there's systemic like downside there. And I think there is for the Bears too. Like the Bears are just overpriced with a rookie quarterback. I wouldn't compare those two, I guess. I do think the Packers are probably a nicer, an easier play to make. All right. 3 picks left. Then I'm going to go. We're approaching the 3-hour mark. I'm obviously tired. I got to do another stream with Neil in a little bit here. I'm going to check something on my phone really quick before I make these final 3 picks. Make you guys wait. This is great radio. Yeah, I'm going to sign up for a workout class at 11:15 right now. I was making sure there was one. Need to get that in, which gives me about 25 minutes. Let's make these last 3 picks. We'll bounce. I'll go work out. before I hop on with Neil later. All right. 17th round. I don't even remember what format this was. Eliminator. 17th round, Eliminator. I already got 3 quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins, and Geno Smith. Do I have them stacked? I don't even have Hurts stacked, which I kind of tend to do a lot. I have Kelsey and Kittle on this team as well. So Hurts and 2 elite tight ends. See if you can notice the issues in my running back and receiver rooms as a result of all of that early volume at non-receiver positions. Cousins, I don't have stacked either. No, I have Drake London. And then I took Geno, but I don't have him stacked. But I took him because he was only 6 picks behind ADP here. There was one Geno pick I made where he was way behind ADP, but this is an interesting one where I obviously don't have a lot of stack equity going on here. The running backs are Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, Kendre Miller, Marshawn Lloyd, and Kamani Vidal. The receivers are Puka, Drake London, Hollywood Brown is the 3. I get him a little bit behind ADP. Christian Watson is the 4 here. We were just talking about him. Get him a little bit behind ADP. I'm not taking a lot of either of them, but there's a team here that I took them both. Josh Palmer is the 5. I hate this receiver room. Outside of Puka and London, I mean, Hollywood is the 3, Watson is the 4, Palmer is the 5, Marvin Mims is the 6, is not going to get it done in an eliminator. Najee Harris and Javonte Williams, the top running backs. Jalen Hurts has to be a stud, has to be the QB1 overall. And Kelsey and Kittle have to really be right at tight end to get me a lot of tight end points. And this team probably still doesn't get there. This was an eliminator. Yeah, this team's getting eliminated by week 3. Good luck, buddy. I mean, I need like floor in my wide receiver room was how bad this is. Luke McCaffrey is the top receiver by ADP. I'm just going to take him. Hopefully he runs a lot of routes out of the slot early in his career. He only matches one other receiver's ADP, Marvin Mims, who's also not like a high profile pick in this build. I really need Puka and Drake London to be consistent monsters, target monsters. And then I think this team has a shot. The other guy that I'm gonna take on this team is Greg Dortch, whose ADP doesn't match up with anyone else. I almost went down to get him, but as I go through this turn, I'm gonna take Dortch in the 18th round as my wide receiver 8, assuming he doesn't go on this turn here. I mean, he could. There's no Kyler on the turn. I should have checked that. And I'm gonna settle on a 5 running back build here with Najee, Javonte, Kendre Miller, Marshawn Lloyd, and Kamani Vidal, which is probably not going to be good enough. Dom beat me to it. Get ready to learn Greg Dortch. That's my 18th round pick. The marathon here, we are in the 16th. This team is Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson. This must be a Jamar Chase team. Trey Benson as the RB1. Chase Brown. I mean, that could be like no running back scoring through the first 7 weeks. Kendre Miller, the RB3. I mean, that could still be no running back scoring. I got Ray Davis and Khalil Herbert as my 4 and 5, but this running back room needs guys that are actually going to play. I actually think J.K. Dobbins makes a lot of sense in that regard. We're worried about him actually getting back and being efficient enough, but I think, I mean, if there's a lot of scenarios where he's playing, but just like not super efficient at it. Braylon Allen would be a more fun play here. Greg asked, so you were not stacking Jalen Hurts on that eliminator team. So by the time I took Hurts, both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown were gone. I could have taken Dallas Goedert, but I didn't think I had to force that. And in particular, because part of Jalen Hurts' upside is the rushing TDs. He had 15 rushing TDs last year. That's not so much about passing TDs, right? I would like to stack him with those other, the good receivers at the top. But I thought he was a good pick for the eliminator because he's a round 5 buy. Early buy, and I do think the elite QB stuff can be helpful in providing a weekly full floor, although 3 QB builds also in some ways can be helpful in providing a floor. But Yeah, I mean, I guess I just didn't think. I don't know. I don't love it, but that was the thought process that I didn't need to stack him because of the mobility. I don't know if I love it. The receivers here: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Xavier Worthy, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. We got Andrews and Brock Bowers at tight end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 receivers, and they're all pretty high profile. JSN was the 6th receiver here. So I went receiver, 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 tight end, receiver, receiver. 6 out of the first 7 picks were receivers. I've not taken another receiver since. I'm not going to here. I have Elijah Moore in the queue. He can be a late round wide receiver 7 to stack with Deshaun Watson. I have a T. Higgins build is why we got to Joe Burrow. I could potentially get to a third QB. I just think I need to continue to add to this running back build. This is one of those really late round eliminator running back builds that I was talking about. Or that was a marathon. It's got to hit on something late. I got to keep firing running back bullets there. The last marathon here, it's the 18th round. This is the last pick for this team. It's a Brock Purdy, Daniel Jones, Bo Nix, 3 QB build here in the marathon. Kyron Williams, James Conner, Chase Brown, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright, Braylon Allen. That's a good 6 running backs. Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, Rashee Rice, Jerry Jeudy, and Marvin Mims are the 6 receivers. Definitely like the top names. Jefferson, Adams, Keenan Allen, and Rashee Rice are really nice picks at their cost if they stay healthy. McBride and Kittle at tight end. It needs a wide receiver 7, though, no doubt. I have Rondale Moore in the queue. I think I probably put a few guys in the queue, like DJ Chark and Javon Baker and Devontae Walker and Greg Dortch, and they all went. And Moore is the only one that made it through. Oh, man. Jalen Tolbert is there in the queue. As far as a marathon goes, I mean, there's a guy that probably gets a lot of playing time. I think Rondale Moore is going to have his moments too. I don't have a single receiver with a week 12 bye, which is, one of the downsides to Rondale Moore is he has a popular bye. Tolbert has an unpopular week 7 bye, but I do have Keenan Allen on that bye. I just don't think Tolbert's probably that good. It's one of these 2 guys. Time for that workout with the yawn. Seriously. I'm excited for that. I don't really have an answer. What do you guys think? Rondale Moore, Jalen Tolbert. Mims is kind of that same play as Tolbert. Rondale Moore feels lower ceiling, higher floor. I do feel like I have floor built into this. Jefferson, Adams, Keenan Allen, and Rashee Rice, and even Jerry Jeudy. Like, these guys are going to play a ton. I'm gonna go Jalen Tolbert. I don't take a lot of him, but decided that would be the pick there. All right. That's going to do it. We're going to wind it down. I'm going to go work out. It's been real. Appreciate all you guys. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications. I am running out of drafts. I mentioned that, we just finished up a bunch of them here on stream, and I don't know when I'm going to get back down to Oregon. So it's possible I won't be back until next Wednesday. I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep doing multiple streams a week right now. Also, because I'm working on my projections, I'm going to be doing the podcast series with Mike Leone. Got a bunch of guest spots in the next week. This next little bit here into early July, I might not be doing as many streams as I was. And then I actually have the other vacation that I mentioned earlier, so I'll have to take a week off as well. But we'll consistently do Wednesday mornings. I appreciate you guys showing up here this morning. That's the goal. Brian says, go listen to Woody Guthrie's Grand Coulee Dam. We did a little Grand Coulee Dam chasing today. Did a little map, Google Maps. Looked at the Flathead Lake in Montana, the Columbia River. Some fantastic, beautiful bodies of water in the western United States. This has been a blast, guys. We will be back next Wednesday, if not before. I don't know. We'll see. I might fire up something on Friday or Saturday morning would be the best windows. We'll keep you guys posted. Get those notifications on. If not, I'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks again for hanging out. This has been Stealing Signals. Peace.